The gunshot shattered the midnight silence of Redstone Crossing like breaking glass. Marshal Caleb Hunter stood alone in the dusty street, facing 12 armed riders who'd just burned 3 homesteads to ash. Behind him, the town held its breath. Before him, Victor Kane sat tall in his saddle, smiling like the devil himself. "You're one man, Hunter," Kane drawled, "and we're the future of this territory." Caleb's hand hovered over his Colt. "Then the future's about to get bloody." Welcome to Redstone Crossing, where one marshal's choice will decide whether civilization or chaos rules the frontier. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me tell you how it all began. The cattle came like thunder rolling across the plains. Caleb Hunter stood on the weathered boardwalk outside the marshal's office, watching the massive herd approach Redstone Crossing through a cloud of dust that turned the afternoon sun blood red. Even from 2 miles out, he could hear them, thousands of longhorns driven north by exhausted cowboys who'd spent 3 months on the trail from Texas, pushing through rivers, storms, and Comanche territory to reach this single dusty town at the end of civilization. This was the 5th herd in 2 weeks, maybe the 7th. Caleb had stopped counting. He pulled a bent cigarette from his shirt pocket and struck a match against the office doorframe, cupping his hands against the wind. The flame danced, caught, and he drew smoke deep into his lungs while studying the approaching storm of hooves and horns. 5 years since the war ended. 5 years since he'd walked away from burned fields and broken promises back east. 5 years of drifting from one nameless town to another, wearing different badges in different territories, always moving before the ghosts could catch up. But Redstone Crossing had asked him to stay. "They're early this year," a voice said behind him. Caleb turned to find Samuel Briggs, the town's senior councilman, stepping onto the boardwalk. Briggs was a soft man with merchant's hands and a politician's smile, the kind who could sell you a lame horse and make you thank him for the privilege. He owned the largest general store in town, and rumor said he owned 3 of the 5 councilmen as well. "Kane's herd," Caleb said, more statement than question. "The man himself is riding point." Briggs pulled a handkerchief from his vest and dabbed at his forehead, though the September air carried a cool edge. "He'll want to speak with you. Best keep it friendly, Marshal. Victor Kane isn't a man this town can afford to anger." Caleb took another drag from his cigarette, letting the silence stretch. Through the haze, he could now make out individual riders, maybe 20 cowboys flanking the herd, pushing the cattle toward the holding pens on the north side of town. The Longhorns would rest here 3 days, get sold to buyers from Chicago and Kansas City, and then move on. The cowboys would spend their wages in the saloons and brothels, fight in the streets, occasionally shoot each other, and then drift away like smoke. That was how it had always worked. "I keep the peace, Mr. Briggs," Caleb said finally. "That's what you hired me for. Not to be friendly, not to take sides, just to keep the peace." Briggs's smile tightened. "Of course, Marshal. That's all we ask." But his eyes said different. They said, "Don't cause trouble with the men who keep this town alive." As Briggs retreated into his store, Caleb finished his cigarette and flicked the butt into the street. The wind caught it, sent it tumbling toward the approaching cattle. A fitting metaphor, he thought, small things getting crushed under forces too big to stop. The herd reached town an hour before sunset. Caleb watched from the shadows of the marshal's office as Victor Kane rode down Main Street like a conquering general. The man sat his horse the way some men wore crowns, with absolute certainty that the world owed him deference. He was maybe 50, though the sun had weathered his face until age became irrelevant. What mattered was the pearl-handled Colt at his hip, the quality of his leather saddle, the way his riders positioned themselves around him like satellites around the sun. Kane owned the largest ranch in 3 territories. He controlled the cattle trail that brought life to Redstone Crossing. He had money, power, and the kind of connections that reached all the way to Washington. And he was destroying the frontier piece by piece. "Marshal Hunter!" Kane's voice carried across the street, friendly as a rattlesnake's warning. "Heard this town finally got itself some proper law." Caleb stepped into the fading light, his boots loud on the wooden planks. "Mr. Kane? You keep my boys in line, I'll keep them spending money. That's the arrangement, yes?" Kane leaned forward in his saddle, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "My men work hard. They play hard. Long as they're not killing each other, we don't have problems. Long as they follow the law, we don't have problems, Caleb corrected. The smile froze. Behind Kane, 3 of his riders shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward gun belts in a gesture so casual it was almost polite. Almost. The law, Kane repeated slowly, tasting the word like spoiled meat. See, that's interesting, Marshal, because I've been riding this trail since before the war. Been bringing cattle through Redstone Crossing when it was nothing but 3 buildings and a prayer. Never needed much law before. Times change. Do they now? Kane straightened, his gaze drifting past Caleb toward the eastern edge of town, where canvas-topped wagons had begun gathering over the past month. Funny thing about change, sometimes it comes in the form of farmers who don't understand how things work out here. Settlers who think they can fence off open range and survive the winter. They have legal claims. Government granted them homestead rights. Government, Kane spat the word like a curse. The government's back in Washington drinking whiskey and drawing lines on maps. They're not out here living it. You want to know what's real, Marshal? What's real is 3,000 head of cattle need to move north, and they need open range to move through. What's real is this town lives or dies based on whether my herds keep coming. Everything else is just paper and promises. Caleb felt the weight of the town watching. Merchants in doorways, cowboys gathering outside the saloon. Even the piano music from the Lucky Strike had gone silent, waiting to see how this played out. The homesteaders have rights, he said quietly. Same as you. Kane studied him for a long moment, and something shifted behind those sun-weathered eyes. Not quite anger, something colder. You're new here, so I'll forgive the education. But let me make something clear. He leaned down, voice dropping to a register meant only for Caleb. Those settlers? They're dead men. They just don't know it yet. This land eats people who don't understand its rules. I've seen it happen 100 times, and no badge is going to change that. He straightened, smile returning like he'd just commented on the weather. Enjoy your evening, Marshal. My boys will be gentlemen, I promise. Kane wheeled his horse and rode toward the cattleman's hotel, his men following in formation. The street slowly came back to life, piano music resuming, conversations restarting, the town exhaling a collective breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Caleb stood alone in the gathering darkness, watching Kane disappear into the Golden Horn Hotel. The man was right about one thing. The land out here did eat people. The question was whether Caleb would let it eat his conscience too. Inside the marshal's office, his deputy Thomas Reed was cleaning rifles by lamplight. Reed was 23, eager as a hunting dog, and still believed badges meant something. Give him 5 years, Caleb thought. 5 years of watching power triumph over justice, and that light in his eyes would go out like a candle in the wind. Kane seems friendly, Reed said without looking up. As a copperhead. What'd he want? To remind me who runs things. Caleb crossed to the small stove in the corner and poured coffee into a tin cup. It was thick as mud and twice as bitter, exactly how he needed it. How many settlers came in today? 3 more wagons. That German family, the Schmidts, and 2 brothers from Ohio. They're camped east of town with the others. How many total now? Maybe 40 families. Could be more by month's end. Reed finally looked up, his young face creased with worry. They're going to try to fence that land, Marshal. Kane's not going to allow it. It's not Kane's land to allow or disallow. Try telling him that. Caleb sipped his coffee, staring at the wall map that showed Redstone Crossing and the surrounding territory. Pencil marks indicated homestead claims, a patchwork of 160-acre parcels spreading east from town like a rash. The cattle trail ran straight through the middle of it, a dotted line that had existed long before any surveyor put marks on paper. 2 different futures drawn on the same map, only one could survive. Get some sleep, Reed. I'll take first watch. The young deputy hesitated. You really think there'll be trouble? I think trouble's already here. We're just waiting to see what it looks like. After Reed left, Caleb stood at the window watching the town settle into its nightly rhythm. Laughter spilled from the saloons. A woman sang somewhere, her voice carrying over the sound of breaking glass and shouted bets. 3 cowboys stumbled past, already drunk enough to need each other for balance. This was Redstone Crossing. Chaos and commerce, violence and prosperity. A town that had grown rich feeding off the men who drove cattle through it, and now faced settlers who wanted to plant roots and call it home. Somewhere out in the darkness, those settlers were making camp, building fires, cooking meals, telling their children stories about the good land waiting for them, the fresh start they'd been promised. They had no idea they were sleeping in a graveyard. Caleb finished his coffee and strapped on his gun belt. Time to walk the streets, show the badge, remind Kane's cowboys that law still meant something, even if that meaning was getting thinner by the day. The night air hit him like cold water when he stepped outside. Above, stars burned in a sky so clear it felt like you could reach up and touch heaven. It was beautiful out here in a way that made his chest ache. Beautiful and brutal and utterly indifferent to whether men lived or died beneath it. He'd just passed the livery stable when he heard the scream. It came from the east, from the direction of the settler camps. A woman's voice, high and terrified, cut short like someone had slapped a hand over her mouth. Caleb ran. His boots pounded the dirt street, gun already drawn. Behind him, doors opened and curious faces appeared, but no one followed. In Redstone Crossing, you didn't chase trouble that didn't belong to you. The settler camp sprawled across 2 acres of grassland just beyond the town limits. Canvas wagons circled like covered bones. Campfires dotted the darkness. As Caleb ran closer, he could see figures moving. Too many figures, too much motion for a peaceful night. Then he saw the flames. The Schmidt wagon was burning. Caleb burst into the camp to find chaos. The German family's canvas top was fully engulfed, orange flames reaching toward the sky like desperate prayers. Hans Schmidt, a bear of a man with a farmer's shoulders, was screaming in broken English while trying to pull belongings from the inferno. His wife Maria held their 2 children close, her face streaked with tears and soot. But what made Caleb's blood run cold was the 3 riders circling the camp on horseback, whooping and firing pistols into the air. They wore bandanas over their faces, but Caleb recognized the horses. He'd seen them tied outside the Golden Horn Hotel an hour ago. Kane's men. "That's enough!" Caleb's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Get off those horses, now!" The riders wheeled toward him, and for a moment nobody moved. The only sound was the crackling of the burning wagon and Maria Schmidt's quiet sobbing. Then the largest rider, a man Caleb had seen riding point with Kane, laughed. "This ain't town business, Marshal. Just helping these settlers understand property lines. You're burning their home." "Nah, we're burning a wagon that shouldn't be here." The man's voice was muffled by the bandana, but amusement rang clear. Big difference. Other settlers had emerged from their wagons now, gathering in a loose crowd. Caleb counted maybe 20 men, farmers with soft hands and frightened eyes, not a gun among them that he could see. "Last chance," Caleb said quietly. "Drop your weapons and dismount." The rider's hand moved toward his gun. Caleb shot him. Not to kill, though out here the line was thin. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder and spun him sideways in his saddle. His horse reared and he tumbled to the ground, clutching his arm and screaming. The other 2 riders froze, hands half raised toward their own weapons. "Next one dies," Caleb said, his Colt trained on the nearest man. "Your choice." They chose wisely. Guns hit the dirt, hands went up. "Thomas," Caleb called, though he knew his deputy was still in town. "Get these men locked up." But no one came. The settlers just stood there, watching with wide eyes. Beyond them, Caleb could see more townspeople gathering at the edge of the camp, merchants, cowboys, curious spectators drawn by gunfire and flames. Not one of them moved to help. He was alone. Again. "You," Caleb pointed to Hans Schmidt. "Get buckets. Put that fire out before it spreads." Then to the settlers, "Help him! Move!" The command broke their paralysis. Men scrambled for water while Caleb kept his gun trained on the 2 mounted riders. "Off! Your horses." They dismounted slowly, hands still raised. Caleb approached the wounded man on the ground. He was conscious, groaning, blood seeping between his fingers. The shoulder wound wasn't fatal if treated soon, but it would hurt like hell for weeks. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. "Go to hell. Have it your way." Caleb grabbed the man's good arm and hauled him upright, ignoring his screams. "You 2, walk ahead of me. Toward town. Slow." They started walking. Behind them, settlers had formed a bucket brigade, throwing water on the wagon. The flames were dying, leaving behind charred canvas and ruined belongings. everything the Schmidt family owned, reduced to smoke and ash. The walk back to town felt like marching through a dream. People lined the street, watching in silence as Caleb herded 3 of Victor Kane's men toward the jail. Whispers followed them like wind through dry grass. The marshal shot Kane's rider. He's arresting them. Does he know what he's doing? The answer was no. Caleb had no idea what he was doing. He was following instinct and the oath he'd sworn: protect the innocent, uphold the law. Simple words that became impossibly complicated when power and money stood on the other side. They reached the marshal's office to find Thomas Reed standing outside, jaw hanging open. "Get Doc Morrison," Caleb ordered. "This one's bleeding." Reed didn't move. "Marshal, those are Kane's. I know who they are. Get the doctor, now." The deputy ran. Caleb pushed his prisoners inside, locked 2 in cells, and sat the wounded one in a chair. The man was pale now, sweating through his shirt, probably going into shock. Caleb found clean rags and pressed them against the shoulder wound. "Apply pressure. Doctor's coming." "You're dead," the man whispered. "Kane's gonna kill you." "Maybe. But tonight, you're the one bleeding." Doc Morrison arrived 10 minutes later, a weathered old drunk who'd probably forgotten more medicine than most doctors ever learned. He took one look at the shoulder wound and whistled low. "Clean through. You're lucky, boy." "Don't feel lucky." "Well, you're alive. Out here, that's the definition." Morrison began cleaning the wound with whiskey, ignoring the man's screams. "Marshal, you know whose man this is?" "I know." Then you know you just started a war." "I stopped a crime. That's my job." Morrison paused, meeting Caleb's eyes over his patient. "Your job's going to get you buried. You understand that?" Before Caleb could answer, the office door slammed open. Samuel Briggs stood there, flanked by 2 other councilmen, Harrison Webb, who owned the bank, and Michael Porter, who ran the freight company. All 3 looked like they'd swallowed something rotten. "Marshal Hunter," Briggs's voice shook with barely controlled fury. "We need to talk, now." "I'm busy. This can't wait." Caleb straightened slowly. "Then talk." "Not here. In private. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of witnesses." Briggs's face flushed red. Behind him, Webb and Porter exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Briggs stepped inside and lowered his voice to a harsh whisper. "What the hell were you thinking? Those are Victor Kane's men. Those are 3 men who burned a family's wagon and terrorized a camp of settlers. I arrested them for arson and disturbing the peace." "You shot one. He was reaching for his gun. He works for the most powerful rancher in 3 territories." Briggs's hands were shaking now. "Do you understand what you've done? Kane will what?" Caleb stepped closer, and Briggs retreated a half step despite himself. "Will break the law? Will attack settlers who have legal homestead claims? Will threaten this town's peace? Because if that's what he'll do, then I'll deal with it. That's what you hired me for. We hired you to keep the peace, not to start a war." "The war started when those men put fire to that wagon. I just made sure it didn't spread." Webb stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Marshal, please, be reasonable. The town depends on the cattle trade. Kane brings 40, 50 herds through here every season. That's thousands of dollars in commerce. If he decides to reroute the trail, Redstone Crossing dies. Then maybe Redstone Crossing needs to find a different way to live." The 3 councilmen stared at him like he'd spoken in tongues. "The settlers," Caleb continued, "they're here to stay. They have government land grants. They'll build farms, raise families, create steady business that doesn't disappear when the cattle season ends. That's the future you should be investing in." "Those people are peasants," Porter spat. "Dirt farmers who'll starve come winter. They're not our future. They're a nuisance that's going to cost us everything." "They're citizens, with rights." "Rights," Briggs laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You want to talk about rights? We have a right to protect our livelihoods, to keep this town prosperous. And if that means choosing between some immigrant farmers and the cattle trade that built this place, then you're choosing wrong." Silence fell like a hammer. Outside, Caleb could hear the town settling into deeper night, saloon songs, distant laughter, the lonely bark of a dog. Normal sounds, but nothing was normal anymore. "Release those men," Briggs said finally, his voice cold. "Now." "No." That's an order, Marshal, from the town council. The town council hired me to enforce the law, not to ignore it when it's inconvenient. Then perhaps, Webb said softly, we need to reconsider that hiring decision. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Caleb felt it, understood it, and found he didn't care. Somewhere along the 1,000 miles of drifting, he'd lost the ability to bend. Maybe it happened during the war, watching officers sacrifice men for political gain. Maybe it happened in the dozen towns where he'd worn badges and watched justice get bought and sold like cattle. Or maybe it happened 5 minutes ago, when he'd seen a family's life burn while riders laughed. Do what you need to do, Caleb said, but those men stay locked up until a judge sees them. That's the law. There won't be a judge for 6 weeks. Then they've got 6 weeks to think about what they did. Briggs's face had gone purple. You're finished in this town, Hunter. Finished. Maybe. But tonight, I can sleep knowing I did my job. The 3 councilmen left in a storm of footsteps and slammed doors. Doc Morrison looked up from bandaging his patient and shook his head. Well, Marshal, you just made yourself a lot of enemies. Story of my life, Doc. Victor Kane doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. He'll come for you. Let him come. Morrison finished his work in silence, packed his bag, and paused at the door. For what it's worth. I think you did right. Not smart, but right. He tipped his hat. I'll pray for you. After the doctor left, Caleb checked on his prisoners. The 2 unwounded men sat sullen in their cells, glaring at him through the bars. The wounded one had fallen asleep in the chair, his breathing shallow but steady. Thomas Reed appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Town's talking, Marshal, saying you've gone crazy, saying Kane will burn this place down. They might be right. So what do we do? Caleb looked at his young deputy, at the fear and confusion warring in those earnest eyes. This was the moment, the choice. Reed could walk away now, find another town, another badge, save himself. We do our jobs, Caleb said. We protect the people who need protecting. We uphold the law, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And if Kane comes? Then we deal with Kane. Reed swallowed hard, then nodded. All right, Marshal, I'm with you. You don't have to be. I know, but I am. Something loosened in Caleb's chest, a tension he hadn't known he was carrying. He wasn't alone, not completely. Get some rest, Thomas. We're going to need it. After Reed left, Caleb walked to the window and looked out at Redstone Crossing. The town was still alive, still drinking, gambling, fighting, making money. But underneath the noise, he could feel something shifting, like pressure building before a storm. Kane would come. The councilmen would try to force him out. The town would choose between commerce and conscience. And Caleb would stand in the middle of it all, one man with a badge and a gun, trying to hold back forces that had been building since long before he arrived. He should walk away. He knew that. Ride out before dawn, leave Redstone Crossing to eat itself alive. It's what he'd done in other towns, other lives. Survive. Keep moving. Stay ahead of the ghosts. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the look in Maria Schmidt's eyes when her wagon burned. Maybe it was the quiet desperation of settlers who'd traveled 1,000 miles for the simple dream of owning land. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Too many badges, too many compromises, too many nights wondering if he'd ever stand for something that mattered. Or maybe, Caleb thought as he watched the stars wheel overhead, maybe he was just tired of running. The night deepened. The town's noise faded to murmurs and occasional shouts. In their cells, Kane's men slept or pretended to. Somewhere beyond the eastern edge of town, 40 families huddled in wagons, probably wondering if the marshal who'd defended them would still be alive come morning. Caleb poured himself another cup of bitter coffee and settled into the chair at his desk. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of dust and coming winter. The cattle trail stretched north into darkness, that ancient path worn by a million hooves, and somewhere along it, Victor Kane was learning that his man had been shot and arrested. The war Doc Morrison mentioned? It was already starting. Caleb just had to decide if he'd fight it or flee. He touched the badge on his chest, felt its weight, its promise. Once, it had meant something to him. Honor, justice. A chance to be better than the war had made him. Maybe it still could. Through the window, the first light of dawn began painting the eastern sky with shades of gray and gold. A new day coming to Redstone Crossing. A new choice waiting to be made. Caleb Hunter took a breath, holstered his gun, and walked out to meet it. The street was empty in the early light. Somewhere, a rooster crowed. The smell of bread baking drifted from the hotel kitchen. Normal things, beautiful things, worth fighting for. The sun climbed higher, turning Redstone Crossing's dusty streets the color of old bone. Caleb stood outside the marshal's office, watching the town wake to news that spread faster than wildfire. By mid-morning, every merchant, cowboy, and settler within 10 miles knew what had happened, knew that Marshal Hunter had shot one of Victor Kane's men and locked up 3 more. The reaction split clean down the middle. Merchants whispered behind closed doors, their faces tight with worry. Cowboys gathered in clusters outside the saloons, placing bets on how long the marshal would survive. And out at the settler camps, families emerged from their wagons with something Caleb hadn't seen before in their eyes. Hope. Thomas Reed brought coffee from the hotel kitchen, along with fresh bread that neither of them touched. "Kane's still at the Golden Horn," Reed said quietly. "Hasn't come out since last night. Word is he's sending telegrams east, calling in favors." "How many men does he have in town?" "Maybe 20, but more are riding in. I counted 6 new arrivals this morning." Reed paused. "Marshal, the council's meeting at the bank. Briggs sent word they want to see you at noon." Caleb sipped his coffee, studying the bank building across the street. Its windows reflected the morning sun like hostile eyes. Let them wait. They're not going to back down. Neither am I. A commotion from the east drew their attention. A wagon was approaching, not the slow, cautious pace of new settlers, but fast and desperate. As it drew closer, Caleb recognized the driver. Hans Schmidt, his face grim as death, his wife Maria beside him clutching their youngest child. The wagon skidded to a halt in front of the marshal's office. Schmidt jumped down, and Caleb saw that his hands were shaking. "Marshal Hunter." The German farmer's English was thick with accent and fear. "You must come. Now. They have killed Jacob." Caleb felt ice slide down his spine. "Who's Jacob?" "Jacob Weiss, good man. A farmer from Pennsylvania." Schmidt's voice broke. "They found him this morning, shot, left in the field like garbage." "Who found him?" "His son, 12 years old. The boy, he is—" Schmidt couldn't finish. Maria pressed her face against her husband's shoulder, her own tears falling silent. Caleb grabbed his hat. "Thomas, stay with the prisoners. Don't let anyone in or out. Marshal, if this is Kane's work, then I'll deal with it. Just hold the jail." The ride east took 20 minutes. Schmidt's wagon bounced over ruts and rocks, the farmer driving like the devil himself was chasing them. Maria spoke softly in German, words Caleb didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. Prayers for the dead, curses for the killers. The Weiss homestead sat at the far edge of the settler territory, a half-built cabin in freshly plowed fields that represented months of back-breaking labor. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 15 people, standing in a tight circle around something Caleb couldn't yet see. Then the crowd parted, and his stomach turned to stone. Jacob Weiss lay in the middle of his own wheat field, arms spread like a scarecrow. He'd been shot 3 times, chest, stomach, face. The killing shots were clear. But what made Caleb's blood run cold was what they'd done after. They'd pinned a note to his chest with a knife. Caleb dismounted and walked slowly toward the body. The settlers backed away, their faces pale masks of shock and rage. A young boy, the son Schmidt had mentioned, sat nearby in the dirt, staring at nothing. His clothes were spattered with his father's blood. Caleb knelt beside the corpse and carefully removed the knife and note. The paper was cheap, the handwriting crude but deliberate. 4 words, printed in block letters. "Turn back or die." "When did this happen?" Caleb asked quietly. An older woman, one of the settlers Caleb had seen at community gatherings, stepped forward. "Sometime after midnight. Jacob was checking his fence line. We heard shots, but by the time we got here—" She gestured helplessly at the body. "Did anyone see the shooters?" Heads shook. No one spoke. Caleb studied the ground around the body. 3 sets of hoof prints, heading north back toward town. Professional riders, judging by the spacing and depth. They'd come in fast, done their work, and vanished into the darkness. "We need to bury him," someone said. "Not yet." Caleb stood, folding the note carefully. "This is a crime scene. I need to document everything." "Document?" The older woman's voice rose sharply. "That man has a family. His son just found him murdered in his own field. We're not leaving him here like evidence." "I understand, but no." She stepped closer, her grief transforming into fury. "You don't understand. We came here for safety, for land. The government promised us protection, and now Jacob is dead because he wanted to grow wheat." Her voice cracked. "Where was your protection last night, Marshal? Where was the law when those killers came?" Caleb had no answer. The silence stretched, heavy as the corpse between them. Finally, Schmidt spoke. "We bury Jacob now. My friend deserves respect." Caleb wanted to argue, to explain about evidence and investigation and building a case strong enough to stand in court. But he looked at the boys sitting in the dirt, at the settlers' faces twisted with grief and fear, and understood that legal procedure meant nothing compared to human dignity. "All right," he said, "but I'm taking the note, and I need someone to show me exactly where they heard the shots from, what direction, what time." They buried Jacob Weiss an hour later in a grave dug by men who'd crossed half a continent dreaming of peace. The young widow, Sarah Weiss, barely 25, stood silent throughout, holding her son's hand while settlers sang hymns in German and English. When they lowered the rough pine box into the earth, she finally broke, her sobs carrying across the empty prairie like an accusation. Caleb stood apart from the mourners, his eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, 3 men were riding back to report success. Somewhere, Victor Kane was receiving confirmation that his message had been delivered in blood. After the last shovel of dirt fell, Schmidt approached Caleb with 2 other men, both younger, harder looking than the typical farmer. Brothers, judging by their matching features. "Marshal, this is John and William Cooper, from Ohio." The taller brother, John, extended a hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from work but also from something else. Caleb recognized the pattern. These men had held guns before, and recently. "You fought in the war," Caleb said. Statement, not question. John nodded. 3 years, Pennsylvania infantry. And now you're farmers. "We were farmers before the war. We'll be farmers after." His jaw tightened. "But we won't be victims. Jacob's death can't go unanswered." "It won't. I'll find who did this." "Will you?" William spoke for the first time, his voice edged with skepticism. "Or will you do what every lawman does? Take statements, file reports, and let powerful men get away with murder?" The accusation stung because it was fair. Caleb had seen it happen in a dozen towns, justice that bent to accommodate money and influence, badges that became decorative rather than meaningful. "I arrested Kane's men last night," Caleb said quietly. "Shot one. They're sitting in jail right now, and they'll stay there until they face a judge." The brothers exchanged glances. "We heard," John said. "The whole territory's heard. That's why we're talking to you instead of loading rifles." He paused. "But talk only goes so far, Marshal. These people came here believing in law and order. If you can't provide it, we'll provide our own. That's called vigilante justice. It's still murder." "Is it murder to defend your family? To protect your home?" "It is when you take the law into your own hands." William laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "The law? The law gave us land grants, then abandoned us to wolves like Kane. The law says we have rights, but won't enforce them. So tell me, Marshal, what good is your law if it only protects rich men?" Caleb had no good answer. He'd asked himself the same question too many times. "Give me time," he said finally. "Let me investigate. Let me build a case." "How much time?" John asked. "As much as it takes." "We don't have that luxury. Every day we wait, Kane gets stronger. More settlers arrive, more targets for his men." John's voice dropped. "We're not fools, Marshal. We know how this ends. Either we stand up now, together, or we die alone like Jacob." Before Caleb could respond, a shout came from the eastern edge of the settlement. Everyone turned to see a rider approaching, not settlers or cowboys, but someone else. The horse was a fine bay gelding, and the rider wore a dark suit too expensive for this part of the territory. The man dismounted smoothly and walked toward the group with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to deference. He was maybe 40, clean-shaven, with cold eyes that assessed everything and revealed nothing. "Gentlemen," the stranger's voice carried an Eastern accent, "I'm looking for Marshal Hunter." Caleb stepped forward. "You found him." The man produced a leather wallet and flipped it open to reveal a badge, different from Caleb's, but no less official. "U.S. Marshal James Garrett, I'd like a word." The settlers muttered among themselves. A federal marshal meant official attention, which could be good or catastrophic depending on whose side he was on. Garrett gestured away from the crowd. "Privately, if you don't mind." They walked towards the half-built cabin, out of earshot. Garrett pulled out a thin cigar, offered one to Caleb, who declined, and lit up slowly. "Hell of a mess you've started," Garrett said conversationally. "I didn't start it. I'm trying to stop it." "By arresting Victor Kane's men? By inserting yourself between cattle barons and homesteaders?" Garrett blew smoke toward the sky. "That's not stopping trouble, Marshal. That's inviting it to dinner. What brings a U.S. Marshal to Redstone Crossing?" "You do, actually. Got a telegraph this morning from the Territorial Governor's office. Seems Mr. Kane has friends in high places. Friends who are concerned about the safety of legitimate commerce in this region." "Legitimate?" Caleb tasted the word like spoiled meat. "Is burning wagons and murdering farmers legitimate? Can you prove Kane ordered those actions?" "Not yet." Then legally, he's an innocent businessman facing harassment from overzealous local law enforcement." Garrett's smile was thin as a knife blade. "That's how it'll read in the reports anyway." "You came here to tell me to back down." "I came here to offer perspective. The cattle trade brings millions of dollars through this territory every year. Employment for thousands of cowboys, revenue for dozens of towns. The government has a vested interest in keeping that trade flowing smoothly. And the homesteaders are citizens with legal rights that will be protected under the law." Garrett's voice remained neutral, professional. "But the reality is, most of them won't survive out here. The land's too hard, the weather too brutal. By spring, half these families will be gone, dead from disease, starvation, or giving up. That's not cruelty, Marshal. That's just truth." "So we should let Kane drive them out faster? Save them the trouble of dying slow?" "I'm saying pick your battles. You're one man with a local badge. Kane controls more land than some eastern states. He has money, lawyers, political connections reaching all the way to Washington. You can't win this fight." Caleb was silent for a long moment, staring at the fresh grave where Jacob Weiss would spend eternity. "Maybe not," he said finally, "but I can make him pay for every inch." Garrett sighed, flicking ash from his cigar. "I was afraid you'd say that." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is an official notice from the Territorial Court. You're ordered to release Kane's men immediately. There's insufficient evidence for charges. They burned the Schmidt wagon. I have witnesses. You have settlers who heard noise and saw fire. You don't have anyone who can identify the perpetrators beyond reasonable doubt. The men claim they were in town all night, and several saloon owners are willing to testify to that fact. They're lying. Probably, but it's their word against yours, and the law requires more than suspicion." Garrett handed over the envelope. "Release them by sundown, or I'll do it myself and file charges against you for unlawful detention." Caleb took the envelope, feeling its weight like a stone. "What about Jacob Weiss? What about his murder?" "If you find evidence linking specific individuals to the crime, file proper charges through appropriate channels. But understand something, Marshal. People die on the frontier. Accidents happen. Disputes turn violent. You can't arrest the wilderness. This wasn't the wilderness. This was murder." "Then prove it, following proper procedure." Garrett ground out his cigar under his boot heel. "I'm staying at the Golden Horn tonight. If you need to discuss this further, you know where to find me." He walked back to his horse, mounted smoothly, and rode toward town without looking back. Caleb stood alone beside the cabin, holding the envelope that represented everything wrong with frontier justice. The law existed, sure, written in books, enforced by badges, theoretically blind to wealth and power. But theory and practice diverged like rivers splitting, and out here, money flowed stronger than justice. Schmidt approached cautiously. "Bad news?" "They're ordering me to release Kane's men." The German farmer's face darkened. "So they burn our homes, murder our neighbors, and walk free?" Not if I can help it, but I need evidence, real evidence that will hold up in court. We are your evidence. We saw them. You saw riders with covered faces. Unless someone can positively identify them, a lawyer will tear your testimony apart. Caleb folded the envelope and tucked it into his jacket. But there might be another way. He walked back to where the Cooper brothers stood with a cluster of settlers. All of them watched him with expressions ranging from hope to suspicion. I need your help, Caleb said. All of you. These killings won't stop unless we force them to stop. But we have to do this right, legally right, or we're no better than the men we're fighting. What do you need? John Cooper asked. Organization. I want someone watching the cattle trail, day and night. Any suspicious riders, any groups that don't match regular trail crews, I need to know about them immediately. I want witnesses who can provide detailed descriptions, times, directions of travel. You want us to spy on Kane's men, William said. I want you to document their movements, create a record we can use in court. And if they come after us while we're watching, then you defend yourselves, but only in self-defense, and only with witnesses present. Caleb looked at each face in turn. I know you're scared. I know you want to fight back. But vigilante justice will destroy any chance we have of building real law here. It'll give Kane exactly the excuse he needs to wipe you out with government approval. An older settler, a Danish man named Eric Johansson, spoke up. We trust you, Marshal. You stood up for the Schmidts when no one else would. But trust only goes so far when our families are dying. I understand. That's why I'm asking you to help me build a case so strong that even Kane's lawyers can't break it. It won't be fast. It won't be easy. But it's the only way this ends without a war. The settlers murmured among themselves in multiple languages: German, Danish, Norwegian, English. Finally, Schmidt nodded. We will do as you ask. But Marshal, we will also prepare to defend ourselves. Our families come first. I wouldn't expect anything else. The ride back to Redstone Crossing felt longer than the journey out. The sun had reached its zenith, turning the prairie into a furnace. Heat shimmered off the ground in waves, distorting the horizon until earth and sky blurred together. Caleb's mind churned through possibilities. Release Kane's men as ordered, and he'd lose whatever respect he'd gained from the settlers. Refuse to release them, and the federal marshal would do it anyway while filing charges that could end Caleb's career. Either choice led to the same place: Kane's men walking free, the message clear that violence against settlers carried no consequences. Unless he could find proof, real, undeniable evidence connecting specific men to specific crimes. The office was empty when he arrived. No Reed, no prisoners calling for water or food, just silence and the stale smell of yesterday's coffee. Then Caleb noticed the jail cells. They were open, empty. His hand went to his gun as he scanned the room. No signs of struggle, no blood, just an overturned chair and a note pinned to his desk with the same knife that had been used on Jacob Weiss. The note was in different handwriting this time, educated, elegant. The law serves those who respect it. Your deputy is safe. The prisoners are free. No one need be hurt if reasonable men make reasonable choices. VK Caleb crumpled the note, fury rising like bile. Kane hadn't waited for the federal order. He'd simply taken what he wanted, demonstrating with perfect clarity who actually controlled Redstone Crossing. The door opened. Thomas Reed stumbled in, his face bruised, lip bleeding. He saw Caleb and sagged with relief. Marshal, I'm sorry. I tried to. There were 8 of them. They came through the back, had guns on me before I could react. Are you hurt? Just pride. Reed touched his split lip gingerly. They said if I tried to stop them, they'd burn the office with me inside. Said they were being merciful because you're new here, don't understand how things work yet. Where are they now? Kane took his men to the Golden Horn, whole group of them, celebrating like they won a war. Reed's voice shook with humiliation and rage. What do we do, Marshal? Caleb looked at his deputy, young, idealistic, still believing that badges meant something. He thought about Jacob Weiss buried in a shallow grave, about Maria Schmidt weeping over charred belongings, about 40 families camped on the prairie, waiting to see if the law would protect them or abandon them. We do our jobs, Caleb said quietly, but first I need you to understand something. This isn't going to end well. Kane has money, power, Connections. The federal marshal is on his side. The town council wants me gone. Every reasonable voice is telling me to walk away. Are you? Walking away? Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he unbuckled his gun belt, laid it on the desk, and removed the marshal's badge from his vest. The metal was warm from his body heat, worn smooth from previous owners. How many men had worn this star? How many had made the same choice he was making now? He pinned it back on his chest. No, he said. I'm staying. But you don't have to. You can resign right now, ride out, find another town where the odds are better. I won't think less of you. Reed wiped blood from his lip and straightened his shoulders. I took an oath, same as you, to protect and serve. Didn't say anything about only when it's easy. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I know. People might die. Probably will die. I know that too. Reed met Caleb's eyes. But if we don't stand up now, what's the point of wearing these badges? Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a weight lifting, or maybe settling into place. He wasn't alone, not completely. All right then, he said. Let's go see Mr. Kane. The Golden Horn Hotel stood 3 stories tall, the finest building in Redstone Crossing. Its restaurant served steaks thick as books, its bar stocked whiskey from Kentucky, and its rooms provided luxuries most settlers would never experience. It was the heart of the cattle trade, where deals worth thousands of dollars were struck over cigars and cards. Caleb and Reed walked through the front doors to find the lobby crowded. Cowboys, ranchers, merchants, all watching with the hungry anticipation of spectators at a hanging. Word had spread. Everyone knew the marshal was coming. Everyone wanted to see what happened next. Victor Kane sat at a corner table, surrounded by his men. The 3 prisoners Caleb had arrested were there, drinking whiskey like free men. The wounded one still wore a bandage, but his gun belt was back in place. They all looked up when Caleb entered, and their laughter died like wind before a storm. Kane set down his glass slowly, deliberately. Marshal Hunter, join us for a drink? Step outside. We need to talk. I'm comfortable here. I wasn't asking. The room went silent. Kane's smile froze, his eyes going cold and flat. You forget yourself, Marshal. I'm a private citizen in a public establishment. You have no authority over me. I have authority over men who commit crimes in my town. What crimes? Kane spread his hands in mock innocence. I'm a rancher. I run cattle. I follow the law. Your men burned a wagon last night. This morning, a settler named Jacob Weiss was murdered. Tragic, I'm sure. But what does that have to do with me? Caleb stepped closer, his hand near his gun. Around them, cowboys shifted, hands drifting toward their own weapons. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 1 marshal, 1 deputy, against maybe 20 armed men. If it came to shooting, Caleb and Reed would die in seconds. But sometimes the threat of violence mattered more than violence itself. I know you ordered those attacks, Caleb said quietly. I know you're trying to drive the settlers out. I'm here to tell you it stops. Now. Kane stood slowly, and Caleb was reminded that beneath the expensive clothes and political connections lived a man who'd built his empire with his own hands. There was real danger here, not just hired guns, but personal will backed by absolute certainty. Let me explain something to you, Marshal. Something about how the world actually works. Kane's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. This land? It doesn't belong to anyone, not really. It belongs to whoever's strong enough to take it and keep it. For 20 years, I've been strong enough. I've built an empire from nothing, fought Comanche outlaws, droughts, blizzards, buried good men and bad men, earned every acre through blood and sweat. He paused, letting the words settle. Now these settlers come with their government papers, their dreams of farming. They think signing a document makes the land theirs. But paper doesn't mean anything out here. Reality does. And the reality is, they can't survive. The first hard winter will kill half of them. Disease will take more. The ones who last will either give up or get smart and sell out to people like me who actually understand this country. They have legal rights. Legal rights, Kane laughed. You sound like those lawyers back east who've never left their offices. They write laws about land they've never seen, people they've never met. Then they send men like you to enforce those laws and wonder why everything goes to hell. He picked up his whiskey and drained it in one swallow. I'm going to make you an offer, Marshal. Walk away. Pretend you don't see what's happening. Let nature take its course with the settlers. In return, I'll make sure my men behave in town. No more trouble, no more burned wagons. I'll even throw in a bonus, say $200 a month on top of your regular salary. Consider it a consulting fee." The bribe hung in the air like gun smoke. Caleb felt the room watching, measuring. This was the moment. The choice every lawman faced eventually, principle or profit, justice or survival. "No," he said simply. Kane's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You're sure? $200 is a lot of money for a man making 40 a month." "I'm sure." "Then you're a fool." Kane's voice went cold. "Because I'm also going to make you a promise. If you continue interfering with my business, I will destroy you. I will have your badge. I will make sure you never work in this territory again. And if you push me hard enough, I will have you buried in an unmarked grave where no one will ever find you." The threat was delivered without emotion, a simple statement of fact. Caleb's hand moved to his gun, not drawing, just resting. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and intimidation of federal witnesses." Kane stared at him like he'd spoken in tongues. Then he laughed, a genuine sound of disbelief and amusement. "You can't be serious. Step outside. Hands where I can see them." The laughter died. Kane glanced at his men, then back to Caleb. "There are 20 guns in this room pointed at you. You really think you're walking out of here? I think you're a businessman who understands consequences. You kill a marshal, the territory will send federal troops. Your political friends won't be able to protect you. Your cattle empire ends." Caleb's voice remained steady. "So yes, I think I'm walking out of here. Question is whether you're coming with me peacefully or in chains." The silence stretched like razor wire. Cowboys had their hands on gun butts. Reed stood beside Caleb, pale but steady. The hotel owner had disappeared behind his desk, probably to avoid catching stray bullets. Then Victor Kane smiled. "You've got courage, I'll give you that. Stupid courage, but courage nonetheless." He buttoned his jacket slowly. "All right, Marshal, let's go see what your law looks like." They walked out together, Caleb, Kane, Reed, and half the town following at a distance. The procession moved down Main Street like a strange parade, everyone silent, everyone waiting for the moment things would turn bloody. They almost reached the marshal's office when the rider appeared. He came from the west, his horse lathered with sweat, riding like death itself was chasing him. The crowd parted and he pulled up short, practically falling from the saddle. "Marshal!" the rider gasped. "The settlers! They're under attack! Kane's men are burning the whole camp!" Caleb felt the bottom drop out of his world. Kane's smile widened. "Guess you made your choice, Marshal. Now live with it." Caleb didn't think. He ran. His boots hammered against the dirt street as he sprinted toward the livery stable, Reed's footsteps pounding behind him. The messenger's words echoed in his skull like gunshots, burning the whole camp, and all he could see was Maria Schmidt's face, the children huddled in wagons, families who'd trusted him to keep them safe. Behind them, Kane's laughter carried on the wind. "Saddle 2 horses," Caleb shouted at the stable boy. "Fast ones, now!" The kid scrambled to obey while Caleb checked his gun. 6 rounds in the Colt, a dozen more in his belt. Not enough. Never enough. Reed appeared beside him, his own weapon drawn, face set in grim determination. "He planned this," Reed said through gritted teeth. "Kept you busy in town while his men attacked." "I know. We can't fight them all, Marshal. If there's a full crew out there, then we fight anyway." They mounted as the stable boy finished cinching saddles. Caleb dug his heels in and the horse leaped forward, racing east toward the column of smoke now visible against the afternoon sky. Black smoke. Thick. The kind that came from burning canvas and wood and everything families owned. The 2-mile ride felt like 20. The horse beneath Caleb strained, muscles bunching and releasing as hooves tore across the prairie. Wind whipped his face, carrying the smell of burning that grew stronger with every stride. Behind him, Reed kept pace, and further back, too far back to matter, he heard other riders following. Townspeople, maybe, or more of Kane's men coming to finish the job. The settler camp appeared through the smoke like a vision of hell. Half the wagons were already burning, orange flames clawing at the sky. Women screamed, children cried. Men ran in desperate circles trying to salvage what they could, while riders circled the chaos on horseback, whooping and firing pistols into the air like this was all some grand entertainment. Caleb counted 8 riders, all masked, all armed. He drew his Colt without slowing, aimed at the nearest rider, and fired. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder and spun him sideways off his horse. The animal bolted, leaving its rider writhing in the dirt. The other attackers wheeled toward this new threat, their celebration turning to confusion and then anger. Reed fired next, clipping another rider's hat clean off his head. The man ducked instinctively, giving settlers time to scatter toward cover. Then the shooting started in earnest. Caleb threw himself from his horse as bullets whined past, hitting the ground hard and rolling behind an overturned water barrel. Splinters exploded where his head had been a second earlier. He came up shooting, dropping another rider who'd gotten too close. The man's horse reared and trampled him, adding screams to the cacophony. Reed had found cover behind a wagon wheel, trading shots with 2 riders who'd dismounted for better aim. The young deputy's face was pale but steady, each shot deliberate and controlled. Good training. Probably kept him alive. "Marshal!" Hans Schmidt appeared from behind a burning wagon, his face smeared with soot and blood. He carried a pitchfork like a weapon. "They came 20 minutes ago. No warning. Just started burning. Get your people to safety. Move them toward town. We fight. This is our home. You'll die if you stay here." Caleb fired twice more, forcing a rider to retreat. "Get the women and children moving. Now!" Schmidt hesitated, then nodded and ran toward where families were huddled together. Caleb watched him go and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was his fault. He'd arrested Kane's men, provoked a war, and these people were paying the price. A bullet smashed into the barrel beside his head, showering him with splinters. He rolled left, came up firing, and saw one of the masked riders aiming a rifle directly at him from maybe 30 yards out. Too far for a pistol. Too close to miss. Time slowed. Caleb saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the rifle barrel steady, knew with absolute certainty that the next second would be his last. Then John Cooper appeared from nowhere and drove a shovel into the rider's ribs. The rifle discharged into the sky as the man crumpled. Cooper didn't stop. He swung the shovel again, catching another rider across the face with a sound like breaking pottery. The man fell screaming, his mask torn away to reveal features Caleb recognized from the saloons. "Thought you could use help," Cooper shouted over the noise. His brother William was there too, along with a dozen other settlers, men who'd decided that legal process could wait when their families were burning. They'd armed themselves with whatever they could find: axes, hammers, fence posts, a few old hunting rifles. Not soldiers, just desperate men who'd had enough. The tide turned fast after that. The remaining riders saw their advantage evaporating and made the smart choice. They ran. 3 men on horseback racing north toward Kane's ranch, leaving their wounded behind in the dust and smoke. Caleb aimed at the retreating backs but held his fire. Shooting men in the back, even guilty men, left a taste he didn't want. "Let them go," he said quietly. The gunfire faded. In its place came other sounds: crying children, burning wood, the soft moans of wounded men. Caleb stood slowly, surveying the destruction. 8 wagons completely destroyed, another dozen damaged, livestock scattered, belongings strewn across trampled earth like the remains of shattered dreams. And in the center of it all, a body. Caleb walked toward it slowly, dreading what he'd find. But it wasn't a settler. It was one of the attackers, the man he'd shot first. The shoulder wound had bled heavily, turning the earth dark beneath him. His mask had slipped, revealing a face maybe 25 years old, younger than Reed, just a kid playing cowboy for wages. "Is he dead?" Reed appeared beside him, reloading his pistol with shaking hands. Caleb knelt and checked for a pulse. "No, but he will be if we don't stop this bleeding." He looked up at the gathered settlers. "Anyone here know medicine?" The older woman who'd confronted him at Jacob Weiss's burial stepped forward. "I was a nurse. During the war. Help him." She stared at the wounded rider like he was a snake. "This man just tried to kill us, burn our homes." "I know. Help him anyway." "Why?" "Because we're better than they are, and because I need him alive to testify." The woman held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded and knelt beside the bleeding man. Caleb stood, and turned to face the destruction. People were emerging from hiding now, women clutching children, old men who'd survived the war, only to face this new violence, young families who'd traveled 1,000 miles for safety. They all looked at Caleb with the same question in their eyes. "Where do we go from here?" Hans Schmidt approached, his wife Maria beside him. Their youngest child, a girl maybe 4 years old, clung to her mother's skirt, wide eyes reflecting firelight. "The Johanssons lost everything," Schmidt said quietly. "The Muellers too. We have maybe enough wagons left to shelter half the families. Bring them into town. The church has space. Some of the merchants might open their warehouses." "The merchants?" Maria's voice was sharp with bitter laughter. "The same merchants who profit from Kane's cattle? Who want us gone as much as he does?" "Not all of them. Some will help." "Will they?" She looked at her husband, then back to Caleb. "You are a good man, Marshal. You try to do right. But you are one man. Kane has armies, money, power. And what do we have? Burned wagons and broken dreams." Caleb had no answer that wouldn't sound like empty promises. Thomas Reed was checking on the other wounded, 3 more of the attackers, all injured but alive. They sat in the dirt, hands bound with rope that settlers had tied with unmistakable satisfaction. One was cursing in Spanish. Another just stared at the ground, probably realizing that attempted murder carried a rope if Caleb could make charges stick. "We need to get these men back to town," Reed said. "Lock them up proper this time." "With what? Kane already broke his men out once. Then we find a way to hold them, build a stronger lock, postguards." Reed's jaw set stubbornly. "We can't just let them go." Caleb looked at his deputy and saw the same idealism he'd once carried himself. Back before the war taught him that principles bent easy under the weight of reality. Part of him wanted to protect that innocence. The rest knew it was already too late. "Load them in a wagon," he said. "We'll figure out the rest when we get back." The ride to Redstone Crossing became a strange procession. Wounded attackers in the back of a wagon guarded by armed settlers. Families with whatever belongings they'd salvaged, moving toward a town that didn't want them. And at the front, Caleb and Reed, leading people who'd placed their trust in a badge that felt heavier with every passing minute. The sun was setting as they reached the edge of town, painting everything in shades of blood and gold. People lined the street to watch, merchants in doorways, cowboys leaning against hitching posts, curious faces in windows. Their expressions ranged from shock to satisfaction, depending on which side of the divide they stood. Samuel Briggs emerged from his store as the procession passed, his face purple with rage. "What is the meaning of this, Marshal? You can't bring these people into town. They're American citizens who just had their homes burned. They need shelter. They need to go back where they came from. This is a cattle town, not a charity house." Caleb reined in his horse and looked down at the councilman. These people were attacked by armed men. Unprovoked. Illegal. Now they're coming into town whether you like it or not, and you're going to help me find them places to sleep. "I'll do no such thing. The council will hear about this." "The council can go to hell," Briggs sputtered, searching for words. Before he could find them, a new voice cut through the tension. "I'll help." Everyone turned. Doc Morrison stood outside his small office, whiskey bottle in one hand, medical bag in the other. He looked sober for once, or close to it. "My office has a back room," Morrison continued. "Can fit maybe a dozen people if they don't mind being cozy. And I know the church deacon. He'll open the hall if someone asks properly." "This is outrageous!" Briggs turned to the gathering crowd. "Are we really going to let the marshal dictate policy? Invite these people in to drain our resources?" A few voices murmured agreement, but others stayed silent, and some, Caleb noticed with surprise, looked uncertain, maybe even sympathetic. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She ran the boarding house on Oak Street, a widow named Catherine Mills who'd always struck Caleb as practical rather than political. "I have rooms," she said quietly. "Not many, but enough for families with young children. They can stay until they sort things out." "Catherine, you can't be serious," Briggs started. "I lost my husband to violence, Mr. Briggs. I remember what it felt like to have nowhere to go." Her voice remained steady. "These people need help. I'm going to give it." More voices joined in then. The baker offered his storeroom. 2 families who lived above the general store said they could make space. Not everyone. Not even most. But enough to matter. Caleb felt something shift. Not victory, but the absence of total defeat. "Thank you," he said to Morrison, to Catherine Mills, to the others who'd stepped forward, then to the settlers. "Find your places, get settled. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes." The families began dispersing, guided by townspeople toward various shelters. Hans Schmidt paused beside Caleb's horse. "You saved us today, Marshal. Won't forget that." "Just doing my job." "No." Schmidt's hand gripped Caleb's stirrup. "Is more than job. Is choosing what is right when choosing wrong is easier. We see the difference." He walked away before Caleb could respond, joining his wife and daughter as they headed toward Doc Morrison's office. Reed brought his horse alongside Caleb's. "What now?" "Now we lock up these prisoners properly. Postguards. Build the case." Caleb looked toward the Golden Horn Hotel, where lamplight was already glowing in windows, and wait for Kane's next move. "You think he'll let this go? 4 more of his men arrested. Not a chance. But maybe that's the point. Keep pushing until he makes a mistake we can actually prove in court." They rode to the marshal's office to find it wasn't empty. U.S. Marshal James Garrett sat at Caleb's desk, boots propped up, reading a newspaper like he owned the place. "Wondered when you'd get back," Garrett said without looking up. "Heard there was excitement at the settler camp." Caleb dismounted and walked inside, hand resting on his gun. "Get out of my office." "Technically, it's the town's office. I'm just keeping it warm." Garrett folded his paper and finally met Caleb's eyes. "You've got 4 more of Kane's men tied up out there. That true?" 4 men who attacked civilians, burned property, attempted murder." "Can you prove they work for Kane?" "They rode from his ranch. I have witnesses." "Witnesses who are settlers with obvious bias against ranchers. You really think that'll hold up?" Garrett swung his feet off the desk and stood. "Let me save you some trouble, Marshal. Those men will say they were acting independently, maybe settling personal grudges. Kane will deny any knowledge, and without solid proof of conspiracy, no judge will convict." "So I should just let them go? Pretend it didn't happen?" "I'm saying pick your battles. You keep arresting his men, he keeps getting them released. It's theater, expensive, dangerous theater." Caleb crossed to the gun cabinet and pulled out extra ammunition. "Then I'll keep performing until the audience gets the message." "The message being what? That you're willing to die for people who'll be gone come spring?" "The message being that law means something, that power doesn't excuse violence, that—" "Idealism?" Garrett's smile was tired. "I had that once. 20 years of marshalling knocked it out of me. You want to know what I learned? The frontier doesn't care about your principles. It eats them. What matters is survival, compromise, knowing when to bend so you don't break." "Is that what you call it? Bending?" Caleb slammed the cabinet shut. "Looks more like surrender to me." "Call it what you want. I'm still alive, still wearing a badge. Can you say the same in 6 months?" Before Caleb could answer, shouting erupted outside. Both marshals ran to the door to see a crowd gathering, and at the center, Victor Kane himself, walking down Main Street with maybe 30 armed men at his back. The cattle baron looked like he'd dressed for war, gun belt polished, hat tilted just right, the smile of a man who knew he held all the cards and was about to play them. Reed appeared at Caleb's shoulder, breathing hard. "What do we do?" "Whatever happens," Caleb said quietly, "don't shoot first. If this goes wrong, I need witnesses that we acted in self-defense." Kane stopped maybe 20 yards from the marshal's office. His men spread out in a loose semicircle, hands near weapons. Townspeople scrambled for cover, disappearing into buildings or ducking behind water troughs. In seconds, the street emptied except for Kane's crew and the 2 marshals. "Quite a day you've had, Marshal Hunter," Kane called out. "Heard you shot up some of my employees." "Heard wrong. I arrested men who committed crimes." Interesting interpretation. See, the way I understand it, you interfered with citizens exercising their property rights. Property rights don't include arson and attempted murder. Kane's smile widened. Prove it. In court. With evidence. Until then, you're just making accusations against innocent men. Caleb stepped off the boardwalk into the street, moving slowly, hands visible. Behind him, Reed and Garrett emerged from the office. 3 lawmen against 30 armed riders. The mathematics were simple and brutal. "Your men are locked up," Caleb said. "They'll stay locked up until a judge arrives." "We've been through this dance before, Marshal. Seems you're a slow learner. Seems you are too. Every time you break the law, I'm going to arrest you for it. Every time, no matter how many men you bring. Kane's expression shifted, the smile fading into something colder, more dangerous. You really don't understand, do you? This isn't about law, it's about reality. And the reality is I could kill you right now, right here in front of everyone. My lawyers would call it self-defense, witnesses would swear you drew first, and I'd be home for dinner. Maybe, Caleb said, but you'd still be a murderer. Only if anyone cares, and out here, nobody cares about dead marshals who couldn't learn when to quit. The tension stretched like wire about to snap. Caleb watched Kane's hands, watched the men behind him, calculating odds and angles. If shooting started, Reed would die first. He was young, inexperienced. Garrett might survive by diving for cover. Caleb himself would maybe take 3 or 4 with him before the numbers overwhelmed him. A good death, all things considered. Better than the war had offered. Then a new voice cut through the silence. That's far enough, Kane. Everyone turned. John Cooper stood at the corner of the bank building, a rifle in his hands. Behind him, his brother William appeared with another rifle. Then Eric Johansson with a shotgun. Then more settlers, men who'd been dispersing to find shelter but had heard the commotion and come running. 20 settlers, maybe 25, armed with whatever they could carry. Kane's smile faltered for the first time. This doesn't concern you, farmer, he said. It concerns all of us, John Cooper replied. You burn our homes, kill our neighbors, and expect us to watch while you threaten the one man who stood up for us? Not happening. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But we're making it together. The street had transformed into a powder keg. 60 armed men facing each other across 30 yards of dirt. Any one of them could start a bloodbath with a twitchy finger. Caleb saw it in their faces. The settlers scared but determined, Kane's men confused and looking to their boss for orders. The townspeople watching from windows with the fascinated horror of people witnessing their world tear itself apart. U.S. Marshal Garrett stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Everyone needs to calm down, he said loudly. This is getting out of hand. It's already out of hand, Kane shot back. These settlers are threatening lawful citizens. We're defending ourselves. William Cooper's voice shook with anger. You attacked us, burned our homes. Can you prove that? Can anyone prove anything? Kane looked directly at Garrett. Marshal, are you going to allow vigilantes to threaten innocent ranchers? Garrett was silent for a long moment. Caleb could see the calculation in his eyes. Which side to take, how to minimize damage, where his own interests lay. Federal marshals answered to distant authorities who cared about territory-wide stability, not individual justice. Lower your weapons, Garrett said finally. All of you, we're going to resolve this peacefully. There's nothing to resolve, Caleb said. Kane's men committed crimes. They're under arrest. End of discussion. Marshal Hunter, I'm ordering you to stand down. You don't have authority over local law enforcement. I have authority to prevent a massacre. Garrett's voice hardened. Lower your weapon. Release the prisoners. Let me handle this through proper channels. Proper channels? Caleb laughed, a harsh sound. You mean the channels where rich men buy their freedom and settlers get nothing but sympathy? I mean the channels that keep people alive. The argument was interrupted by the sound of running feet. A rider burst into the square, his horse lathered with sweat, eyes wild. Fire! The man shouted. Fire at the church! Every head turned toward the white steeple visible above the buildings. Smoke was beginning to rise from that direction, thin but unmistakable. The church where settler families had just taken shelter. Caleb didn't wait to see who'd started it. He ran. His boots pounded the boardwalk, then dirt, then wooden steps as he raced toward the church at the south end of town. Behind him came others, Reed, some settlers, even a few townspeople. But Caleb was fastest, fueled by rage and the sick certainty that while everyone had been distracted by the standoff, someone had made their real move. The church was old wood, dry as tinder. Flames already licked at the back wall where someone had piled kindling and struck a match. Inside, Caleb could hear screaming, women and children trapped by smoke and fear. He hit the front door at a full run, bursting into chaos. Families huddled near the altar, as far from the flames as possible. Smoke filled the upper air, turning everything hazy and unreal. Children cried. Women called for their husbands. And at the back, fire climbed the walls like a living thing, feeding on decades-old timber and fresh paint. "Get out!" Caleb shouted. "Everyone out! Now!" He grabbed the nearest child, a boy maybe 6, and shoved him toward the door. Other adults were moving now, the paralysis of fear breaking under the necessity of survival. They formed a ragged line, passing children hand to hand toward the exit. Hans Schmidt appeared through the smoke, his daughter in his arms, Maria right behind him. "The deacon!" Maria screamed. "He went to fight the fire!" Caleb looked toward the flames and saw him, an old man with a bucket of water, trying hopelessly to stem the inferno. The fire had already reached the roof beams. In minutes, the whole structure would collapse. "Leave it!" Caleb yelled. "Get out!" The deacon either didn't hear or didn't care. He threw his pathetic bucket of water at the flames and went for more. Stubborn old fool, trying to save his church when the church was already gone. Caleb ran toward him, low under the smoke. Heat pressed against his face like a physical force. His eyes watered, his lungs burned. He grabbed the deacon's arm and yanked him away from the flames. "Time to go, Reverend. My church is already lost. Move!" They stumbled toward the exit together, the deacon sobbing, Caleb half dragging him through smoke that had grown thick as wool. The ceiling groaned overhead. Somewhere, wood cracked with sounds like breaking bones. They burst into fresh air to find the street full of people forming bucket brigades, though everyone could see it was pointless. The church was gone. All they could do was keep the fire from spreading to neighboring buildings. Caleb collapsed on the ground, coughing until he thought his lungs would tear. Someone pressed a wet cloth to his face. When his vision cleared, he found Doc Morrison kneeling beside him. "Breathe slow," the doctor ordered. "You took in a lot of smoke. The families? All out. Thanks to you." Caleb struggled to sit up, watching the church burn. All that history, all those prayers, reduced to ash and smoke. Another piece of Redstone Crossing destroyed in a war nobody had officially declared. Thomas Reed appeared, his face smudged with soot. "Found this outside the back wall." He held up a can, kerosene, half empty. "Someone set this deliberately," Reed said, "while we were all distracted by Kane's show in the street." Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of his failure. He'd been played. Kane had created a spectacle knowing Caleb would respond, giving his real operatives time to strike where it hurt most. Burn the church, terrorize the settlers, send a message that nowhere was safe. And it had worked perfectly. "Where's Kane now?" Caleb asked. "Gone. His whole crew rode out during the fire, headed north toward his ranch." Of course, creating the perfect alibi. They'd all been in the street, visible to dozens of witnesses, when the church caught fire. Whoever actually set the blaze was probably some hired hand nobody would recognize or remember. Caleb stood slowly, every muscle aching. Around him, Redstone Crossing worked to save what could be saved from the flames. Settlers helped townspeople. Townspeople helped settlers. In crisis, the divisions blurred. But Caleb knew they'd return sharper than ever once the immediate danger passed. U.S. Marshal Garrett approached, his expression unreadable. "Still think you can win this?" he asked quietly. Caleb watched the church collapse in on itself, sending sparks toward the darkening sky. "I think I don't have a choice," he said. "Not anymore." The night settled over Redstone Crossing like a funeral shroud, heavy with smoke and unspoken fear. Caleb stood watch outside the smoldering ruins of the church, his rifle cradled in his arms, eyes scanning the darkness for movement that never came. The attacks had stopped, not from mercy, but because Kane had made his point. The message was clear as the stars overhead. Resistance was futile, and the Marshal was powerless to stop what came next. Thomas Reed appeared from the shadows carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed one to Caleb and leaned against the charred fence post beside him. "Prisoners are secure," Reed said. "Got 4 townsmen rotating guard duty. Doc Morrison's with the wounded still." "Anyone talking?" "Not a word. They know Kane's lawyers will have them out by morning." Reed sipped his coffee and grimaced at the bitterness. "The settlers are meeting in Catherine Mills' boarding house. John Cooper asked if you'd join them." Caleb shook his head. "They don't need me right now. They need to decide for themselves what comes next." "And what does come next, Marshal?" We can't protect them. Can't even protect a church in the middle of town. I know. The admission hung between them like gunsmoke. Reed was young enough to still want reassurance, old enough to recognize when none existed. He drained his coffee in silence and walked back toward the marshal's office, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts and the skeletal remains of burned timber. An hour passed. Maybe two. Caleb lost track of time in the way exhaustion makes minutes feel like hours. His eyes burned from smoke and lack of sleep. His shoulder ached where he'd slammed against a doorframe rescuing the deacon. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with clubs. He was contemplating whether coffee or whiskey would serve him better when Catherine Mills approached from the boarding house, her skirt swishing softly in the darkness. "Marshal Hunter," she said formally, "the settlers would like to speak with you, if you have time." "How many are in there?" 20 men. Maybe more. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're angry, Marshal, frightened. Some are talking about things that won't end well for anyone." Caleb followed her back to the boarding house, a sturdy two-story building that had weathered 15 years of frontier storms. The parlor was packed with men, farmers mostly, but also a few merchants who'd helped shelter families, and several townspeople Caleb didn't recognize. They all looked up when he entered, their faces illuminated by lamplight, and something harder. Determination. Or maybe desperation. Out here, the two looked similar. John Cooper stood at the center of the room, his brother William beside him. Both men had that same quality Caleb had noticed before, the controlled stillness of soldiers who'd learned patience in trenches and killing fields. "Marshal," John said without preamble, "we've been discussing our situation. And we've concluded that the law isn't going to protect us. No offense intended. None taken. It's true." The blunt admission seemed to surprise them. Several men exchanged glances. "So you admit it," William said. "You can't stop Kane. I can't stop him alone, but I can make him pay for every crime he commits. Build evidence. Create a record so thorough that eventually, we're all dead." This from Eric Johansson, the Danish settler who'd lost his wagon in the first attack. "Eventually is not good enough, Marshal. We need safety now. Our families need safety now." "What are you proposing?" The room fell silent. Men shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unwilling to say aloud what they'd been discussing. Finally, John Cooper spoke the words they were all thinking. "We're proposing to defend ourselves, organize patrols, set guards, and if Kane's men come again—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear as rifle fire. "You're talking about vigilante justice," Caleb said quietly. "We're talking about survival. It's still illegal. You start killing Kane's men, even in self-defense, and you give him exactly the excuse he needs. He'll bring in federal troops, claim you're insurrectionists, and wipe you out with government blessing. Then what's your solution?" Hans Schmidt stood near the back, his arms crossed. "We wait? We hide? We watch our families burn while you arrest men who walk free the next day? My solution is we hold the line, keep documenting crimes, keep building the case. Eventually, there is that word again," Schmidt's voice rose. "Eventually. My friend Jacob is dead. The Johanssons have nothing. The church is ash. How many more eventually before you admit this is not working?" Caleb had no good answer. He looked around the room at faces that had trusted him, that had believed a badge meant protection, and saw that trust crumbling like the church walls. These were good people pushed past their breaking point, and he understood that desperation better than he wanted to admit. "I understand your frustration," he said carefully. "I share it. But the moment you take justice into your own hands is the moment you lose the moral high ground. You become exactly what Kane accuses you of being, lawless squatters who don't respect order." "Order?" William Cooper laughed harshly. "What order? The order where rich men do as they please and poor men die? That order? The order where we're better than our enemies, where we prove that civilization means something beyond who has the most guns. Pretty words, Marshal, but words don't stop bullets." A new voice cut through the tension. U.S. Marshal James Garrett stood in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. How long he'd been listening, Caleb couldn't say. "He's right, though," Garrett said, stepping into the room. "You start a shooting war, you'll lose. Kane has resources you can't match. But more importantly, he paused, making eye contact with each man in turn. You'll lose support. Right now, you're victims, sympathetic. People in town are starting to question Kane, starting to help you. But the minute you become aggressors, that sympathy evaporates. So we do nothing? John Cooper's hands clenched into fists. Just accept that we're powerless? You organize, legally. Garrett pulled a chair forward and sat down slowly, the movement deliberate. You petition the territorial governor, file formal complaints, document everything just like Marshal Hunter said. And you do one more thing. You stay visible, stay in town, make Kane attack you where everyone can see. Use ourselves as bait, William said flatly. I'd call it strategic positioning, but yes, essentially. And when he does attack, when more of us die, then it happens in front of witnesses, town witnesses, people who can't be dismissed as biased settlers. Garrett leaned forward. You want to beat Kane? You don't do it with guns, you do it with scandal. Make his violence so public, so undeniable, that even his political friends can't protect him. The room fell into thoughtful silence. Caleb studied Garrett with new appreciation. The federal marshal was still a politician at heart, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Politics could be a weapon too, wielded properly. How do we know this will work? Hans Schmidt asked. How do we know you're not just trying to keep us passive while Kane destroys us piece by piece? You don't, Garrett said simply. But I'll tell you what I do know. Victor Kane is powerful, but he's not invincible. He's made enemies, overstepped in ways that make territorial authorities nervous. A few years back, he tried to claim water rights that belonged to 3 smaller ranches. Nearly started a range war before lawyers settled it. The governor remembers. The territorial marshal remembers. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. Kane thinks he's untouchable. That's his weakness. Powerful men always overreach eventually. Your job, all of you, is to survive long enough for him to make that mistake where it counts. And if he doesn't, Eric Johansson's voice was quiet but firm. If he's careful, smart enough to stay just inside the law while destroying us, then you'll have to decide how much you're willing to sacrifice for land that might kill you anyway. Garrett turned back to face the room. That's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. This territory is hard. Half of you won't make it through the first winter, regardless of what Kane does. Disease, weather, failed crops. The frontier has 1,000 ways to break you. The question is whether you're prepared to fight for the chance anyway. The brutal honesty seemed to hit harder than any platitude could have. These men knew the odds. They'd known them when they loaded their wagons back east and pointed them toward empty horizons. But knowing and accepting were different animals entirely. John Cooper broke the silence. We came here to build something, to have land our children could inherit, to be more than what we were back east. His voice was steady, resolved. I don't know if we'll succeed, but I know we won't succeed by running or by becoming the same kind of violent men we're fighting against. He looked at Caleb. You asked us to trust the law, to trust you. That's gotten harder every day. But I'm willing to try it your way a while longer, on one condition. What condition? That you stop pretending this ends peacefully, that you prepare for the reality that Kane won't stop until someone stops him permanently. John's eyes were hard as flint. We'll build your case. Document everything. Play by the rules. But when those rules fail, and they will fail, we're going to defend ourselves. With force if necessary. And I need to know you'll stand with us when that happens, not against us. It was the moment Caleb had been avoiding since he first pinned on the badge. The choice between law as written and justice as lived. Between the oath he'd sworn and the reality of men who used legal loopholes to commit murder. If Kane attacks you, Caleb said slowly, choosing each word with care, and you defend yourselves with appropriate force, I won't arrest you for it. Self-defense is legal. But if you go hunting his men, if you start a war, he paused, then I'll have to stop you, even if I agree with why you're doing it. Fair enough? John extended his hand. Caleb shook it, feeling the calluses that matched his own. The meeting broke up shortly after, men dispersing to whatever shelter they'd found in town. Caleb walked back toward the marshal's office with Garrett beside him, their boots loud in the empty street. You handled that well, Garrett said. You helped. I did what served territorial interests, preventing a range war, maintaining some semblance of order. Don't mistake that for altruism. I won't. Caleb paused at the office door. But I'm curious, what's your real stake in this? Why come all this way just to lecture me about jurisdiction? Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable in the darkness. 20 years ago, I was you, young Marshal in a cattle town trying to keep the peace between ranchers and settlers. I made choices, compromises, let small injustices slide to prevent big violence. He pulled out a cigar but didn't light it, just rolled it between his fingers. Most of those settlers are dead now. The few who survived left. And the ranchers I protected? They got richer, more powerful, more convinced that law didn't apply to them. I told myself I was being pragmatic, realistic. But the truth is I was just scared. Scared of dying for people who probably wouldn't make it anyway. He finally met Caleb's eyes. I don't want you to make the same mistakes. But I also don't want you to die stupidly, thinking martyrdom accomplishes anything. So I'm giving you the same advice I wish someone had given me. Pick your moment. Build your case. And when the time comes to act, make damn sure it counts for something permanent. With that, Garrett walked away toward the Golden Horn Hotel, leaving Caleb standing alone in the darkness with questions he couldn't answer and choices he wasn't ready to make. The next 3 days passed in tense quiet. No attacks, no burned wagons, no midnight riders, just an eerie calm that felt more threatening than open violence. Kane was planning something. Everyone knew it. The question was what and when. Caleb used the time to do what Garrett suggested, build the case. He took statements from every settler who'd witnessed the attacks, documented property damage with sketches and descriptions, created a timeline of events that showed clear patterns of escalation. Thomas Reed proved surprisingly good at paperwork, his neat handwriting filling page after page with names, dates, and details that would bore any judge into attentiveness. The wounded prisoners recovered under Doc Morrison's care, though none of them talked. They sat in their cells, silent and sullen, waiting for Kane's lawyers to secure their release. Caleb knew it was only a matter of time, but every day they stayed locked up felt like a small victory. On the fourth day, the town council called an emergency meeting. Samuel Briggs delivered the summons personally, his face grim with what he probably thought was righteous authority. The council has made a decision regarding your employment, Marshal Hunter. We require your presence at the bank building 3 o'clock this afternoon. I'm busy. This isn't optional. The council has authority to terminate your contract. I suggest you attend unless you plan to be unemployed by sunset. Caleb continued cleaning his rifle, not looking up. Tell the council I'll be there when I'm finished with actual police work. If they want to fire me, they can do it without the ceremony. Briggs sputtered something about respect and proper procedure, but Caleb ignored him until the councilman gave up and left in a huff. Reed, who'd been watching from the corner, allowed himself a small smile. You really don't care if they fire you, do you? Not particularly, badge or no badge, I'm seeing this through. And if they replace you with someone friendlier to Kane, then I'll deal with that when it happens. At 3:15, Caleb finally walked to the bank building where the council met. The 5 councilmen sat behind a long table like judges at a tribunal, Briggs in the center, flanked by Harrison Webb, Michael Porter, and 2 others Caleb barely knew. A 6th chair sat empty, the spot reserved for the church deacon who was currently recovering from smoke inhalation. You're late, Briggs said. You're impatient. Caleb remained standing, hands relaxed but ready. Say what you need to say. Webb cleared his throat nervously. Marshal Hunter, this council appreciates your service to Redstone Crossing. However, recent events have forced us to reconsider whether your approach to law enforcement serves the town's best interests. Recent events, meaning I arrested criminals who happen to work for Victor Kane. Meaning you've created conflict where diplomacy might have sufficed. Your confrontational style has made enemies of powerful people we depend on for economic survival. My confrontational style stopped wagons from burning and families from dying. Did it? Briggs leaned forward, his voice sharp. Because from where I sit, more property has been destroyed in the past week than in the previous 5 years combined. The church is gone. Settlers are camping in our streets. Trade is disrupted. And all because you couldn't exercise basic discretion. Caleb fought the urge to reach across the table and grab the man by his starched collar. The church burned because Kane's men set fire to it. Properties destroyed because Kane ordered attacks. Trades disrupted because Kane wants to drive out competition. None of that is discretion's failure. It's lawlessness that existed long before I arrived. But it was manageable before, Porter interjected. Kane did what he wanted, yes, but quietly. Settlers came and left without fanfare. The town prospered. Your presence has forced everything into the open, made compromise impossible. Compromise with murder is called being an accomplice. It's called survival. Briggs slammed his hand on the table. We live in a harsh land, Marshal. Idealism doesn't fill stomachs or pay debts. Victor Kane brings 40 herds through here every season. That's our livelihood. Without the cattle trade, this town dies. It's that simple. Then maybe it deserves to die. Caleb's voice went quiet and cold. If the only way Redstone Crossing survives is by looking the other way while innocent people get slaughtered, then it's already dead, just hasn't admitted it yet. The council members exchanged glances. Webb shuffled papers nervously. Porter's face had gone red. We're offering you a choice, Briggs said finally. Resign voluntarily. We'll pay you through the end of the month, provide a positive reference. You can find work in another territory where your particular talents might be better appreciated. And if I refuse, then we terminate you for cause. Reckless endangerment of the town, failure to maintain order, insubordination to lawful authority. Briggs's smile was thin and sharp. Either way, you're done here, Marshal. The only question is whether you leave with dignity or disgrace. Caleb looked at each face in turn, seeing fear masked as pragmatism, cowardice dressed as wisdom. These weren't evil men, just small ones, choosing comfort over courage because comfort was easier to live with. I'm not resigning, he said. Then you're fired. Effective immediately. Briggs pulled out a prepared document and slid it across the table. Surrender your badge and weapon. We'll have Thomas Reed assume temporary duties until a suitable replacement is found. Reed won't do it. Then we'll find someone who will. Caleb unpinned his badge slowly, feeling its familiar weight one last time. Part of him wanted to throw it in Briggs's face, tell them all exactly where they could shove their authority. But that would just prove their point about his temperament. So instead, he set it gently on the table with a soft clink of metal on wood. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Kane won't be satisfied with settlers gone. He'll keep pushing until he owns everything, the trail, the town, all of you. That's no longer your concern. Briggs pulled the badge toward himself like claiming a trophy. You have until tomorrow morning to vacate the marshal's office. Leave your weapon and any town property. Caleb walked out without another word, leaving the council to their hollow victory. The street outside was busy with afternoon commerce, people buying supplies, cowboys drinking, life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The last official barrier between Kane and total control had just been removed. Thomas Reed was waiting outside the bank, his face pale with anger. I heard, Reed said. They sent a boy to tell me I'm temporary marshal now. You don't have to accept. I already refused, told Briggs exactly what he could do with the position. Reed's jaw set stubbornly. If you're out, I'm out. That's foolish. You need the work. I need to sleep at night more. Reed fell into step beside Caleb as they walked toward the office. What happens now? Now we see how long it takes them to find someone willing to wear that badge and ignore what Kane does. They didn't have to wait long. By sunset, word had spread that the marshal position was open. By the next morning, a candidate had appeared, a man named Russell Beck, who'd worked as a hired gun in Kansas before drifting south. Beck was lean and dangerous looking, with cold eyes and a reputation for settling disputes with bullets rather than words. Exactly the kind of marshal a town hired when it wanted law without justice. Caleb watched from across the street as Beck met with the council, accepted the position, and pinned on the badge Caleb had surrendered. The new marshal didn't even bother to check the office first. He went straight to the jail and released the prisoners Caleb had been holding. All four walked out free men, slapping Beck on the shoulder like he was their best friend, which Caleb supposed he probably was. Well, Reed said from beside him, that lasted about as long as expected. Surprised it took this long, honestly. They were sitting outside the boarding house where Caleb had taken a room, watching the town transform under new management. Beck's first official act was to post a notice outside the marshal's office. Settlers had 24 hours to clear out of town property. Anyone remaining would be arrested for vagrancy. The second act was announcing new ordinances. No gathering of more than 5 settlers at a time. No weapons carried within town limits except by authorized personnel. No protests or demonstrations against lawful business interests. Each rule carefully designed to criminalize resistance while maintaining a veneer of order. "It's brilliant," Reed said bitterly. "In its own twisted way. Beck's not breaking any laws, just enforcing ones that happen to benefit Kane perfectly. And anyone who objects gets arrested for violating those laws." Caleb stood, stretching muscles still sore from the church rescue. "Come on, we've got work to do." "What work? We're not marshals anymore." "Doesn't mean we stop being useful." They spent the day helping settlers pack up and move back to their camps outside town. Catherine Mills tried to protest the eviction notice, arguing that her boarding house was private property and she could shelter whoever she wanted. Beck smiled and reminded her that housing vagrants violated town health codes. She could comply or face fines that would bankrupt her. She complied, tears of frustration running down her face as families gathered their meager belongings. By nightfall, the settlers were gone from town, driven out without a shot fired, defeated by the simple expedient of legal paperwork and a marshal willing to enforce unjust laws. Caleb helped Hans Schmidt load the last wagon, watching the German farmer's face cycle through rage, grief, and exhausted resignation. "Is over," Schmidt said quietly. "We cannot win this. Maybe we should go home, back east, where at least we know the rules." "Is that what you want?" Schmidt looked at his wife, at his daughter sleeping in Maria's arms, at the empty prairie stretching endlessly beyond the town lights. "I want my family safe. I want land that is ours. I want to believe that justice means something." His voice broke. "But wanting is not enough, is it? Reality, she doesn't care what we want." Before Caleb could respond, a shout came from the eastern edge of town, then another, then gunfire. Everyone froze. The shots weren't close, maybe a mile out, toward the settler camps. But they were rapid, sustained, the sound of a battle, not a warning. Caleb was running before conscious thought caught up with action. Behind him, Reed and several settlers followed, all of them racing toward the gunfire that split the night like breaking glass. The moon was full, turning the prairie silver, and by its light Caleb could see riders circling the settler encampment like wolves around wounded prey. Kane's men. Had to be. A dozen riders, maybe more, firing into wagons while families screamed and scrambled for cover. This wasn't intimidation anymore. It was a massacre in progress. "Go!" Caleb shouted to the settlers behind him. "Get help from town. Anyone who'll come." But he knew nobody would come. New Marshal Beck would take his time responding, if he responded at all. The town council would wring their hands and talk about jurisdictional issues, and by the time anyone official arrived, the killing would be finished. So Caleb did the only thing left to him. He pulled his gun and charged into the firelight, one man against a dozen, hoping his presence would at least draw fire away from families who couldn't defend themselves. He got off 3 shots before the return fire drove him behind a wagon. Bullets punched through canvas, sending up puffs of fabric and dust. Someone inside the wagon screamed, a woman's voice, high and terrified. Caleb couldn't tell if she was hit or just scared. Then John Cooper appeared from the darkness, his rifle speaking with methodical precision. One rider went down, then another. William Cooper materialized on the other side, his own weapon adding to the chaos. Not soldiers anymore, maybe, but the skills remained: how to shoot under pressure, how to find cover, how to kill efficiently when killing was required. The attack faltered. Kane's men hadn't expected real resistance, certainly not organized resistance from farmers they dismissed as cowards. Their advantage evaporated in the face of return fire that actually hit targets. The riders began pulling back, first one, then others, until the whole group was retreating into the darkness with the same speed they'd arrived. Caleb emerged from cover as the gunfire faded. Around him the camp was chaos: crying children, wounded men, women checking bodies to separate dead from injured. But something was different this time. Instead of paralyzing fear, he saw anger. Instead of helpless victims, he saw people preparing to fight back. The Cooper brothers walked through the carnage, checking on settlers, calling out orders with the easy authority of men used to command. Others listened, responding with the instinctive discipline of people who understood that organization meant survival. John Cooper found Caleb near the center of the camp. His face was spattered with blood, someone else's, judging by his steady stance. "They killed two," John said flatly. "The Johansson boy and an old woman I didn't know. Both shot in the back while running for cover." "Anyone from town coming to help?" "What do you think?" Caleb looked toward Redstone Crossing, its lights warm and inviting in the distance. A town that had made its choice decided that commerce mattered more than conscience. He felt something harden in his chest, like steel cooling from forge heat into final shape. "Get everyone armed," he said quietly. "Everyone who can hold a weapon. Post guards in shifts. And tomorrow morning, we're going to have a conversation about what comes next." "Thought you were against vigilante justice." I am. Caleb met John's eyes. "But there's a difference between hunting men down and defending yourself when they keep coming. You have a right to protect your families, and I have a right to help you do it, badge or no badge." John extended his hand. Caleb shook it, feeling the compact seal between them. Not law anymore. Not official sanction. Just two men who'd decided that some things mattered more than rules written by people safe in distant offices. The settlers gathered at dawn, maybe 40 men armed with rifles, shotguns, and whatever else they could carry. Caleb stood before them feeling the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade, words that couldn't be unspoken. "Kane's not going to stop," he said. "You all know that. Every day you stay here, he'll escalate. More attacks, more deaths, until you either leave or die trying to stay." Heads nodded. No one argued. They'd all reached the same conclusion independently. "So you have three choices. First, pack up and leave. No shame in it. Go somewhere safer, start over. Second, stay and keep taking the beatings, hoping eventually someone with authority cares enough to stop it. Third," he paused, making sure they understood what came next. "Third, you dig in and fight, not attacking, not seeking revenge, but making it clear that the next time Kane's men come, they'll pay a price high enough to make them think twice. You create a defense strong enough that violence becomes too expensive even for a man as rich as Kane." "That's war," Eric Johansson said. "That's self-defense organized to actually work," Caleb corrected. "War is when you go hunting. This is when you make hunters realize the prey has teeth." Hans Schmidt stepped forward. "And you, Marshal? You will lead this defense?" "I'm not a marshal anymore. But yes, if you want me, I'll help organize you. Teach you what I know. Make sure when the next attack comes, you're ready. And when Beck arrests us for illegal weapons or unlawful assembly or whatever made-up charge Kane tells him to use," Caleb smiled, though there was no humor in it, "then Beck's going to have a problem. Because I'm betting he doesn't want to fight 40 armed men who've decided they have nothing left to lose." The vote was unanimous. Every hand raised, every face set with the same grim determination that had carried them 1,000 miles for the dream of something better. They spent that day turning the camp into a fortress, wagons arranged in defensive positions, sight lines cleared, guards posted with rifles and clear instructions on when to shoot. Caleb walked them through basics of defensive tactics, fields of fire, fallback positions, how to avoid shooting each other in the dark. The Cooper brothers helped, their military experience showing in how they positioned men and organized watches. By sunset, the settler camp looked less like a collection of refugees and more like a military encampment prepared for siege. Caleb stood on a small rise overlooking it all, feeling the satisfaction of work done right, mixed with the sick certainty that this couldn't end well. Somewhere out there, Kane was receiving reports of the settlers' transformation. Somewhere, decisions were being made about how to respond to defiance that could no longer be ignored. Thomas Reed joined him on the rise, carrying the news Caleb had been expecting. Beck's issued arrest warrants. You, me, the Cooper brothers, and a dozen other settlers. Charges include conspiracy to riot, unlawful assembly, and threatening lawful commerce. Creative charges. Kane's lawyers are good at their jobs. Reed paused. Beck's gathering a posse. Plans to come out here tomorrow with 20 men to serve the warrants. Then tomorrow's going to be interesting. Marshal Caleb, you know this is it, right? The moment where everything either breaks towards something better or collapses into bloodshed that destroys everyone involved. Caleb did know. He'd known since the moment he chose to stay, to fight, to stand between power and people with nothing but conviction and a gun. Every choice since then had been leading to this moment, when the veneer of civilization finally cracked and revealed the violence underneath that had always been there, waiting. "Get some sleep, Thomas," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we find out what kind of men we really are." Dawn broke cold and clear over the settler camp, the kind of morning that made the prairie look almost gentle. Frost clung to wagon canvas like silver lace, and the first light painted everything in shades of gold and shadow. Caleb stood watch on the eastern perimeter, his rifle across his knees, watching the horizon for movement that would signal Beck's arrival. He didn't have to wait long. They came at full light, making no attempt at stealth. 20 riders led by Russell Beck, all armed, all wearing the grim determination of men who believed they were enforcing lawful order. Behind them, Caleb could see townspeople following at a distance, merchants, cowboys, the curious who wanted to watch history unfold but not participate in its making. And at the very back, mounted on a fine black horse, sat Victor Kane himself, not leading, not officially involved, just observing with the satisfied expression of a man watching his investments pay dividends. "They're here," Caleb called quietly. Around the camp, settlers moved into positions they'd rehearsed the night before. No panic, no shouting, just quiet efficiency as 40 men took up rifles and waited for orders that might save their lives or end them. Thomas Reed appeared at Caleb's shoulder, his face pale but steady. "Still time to walk away. Let them serve their warrants. Fight this in court." "You believe that?" "No, but I had to say it." Caleb smiled without humor. "Appreciate the sentiment." Beck's posse stopped about 50 yards from the camp's edge, close enough to be heard, far enough to avoid immediate danger. The new marshal stood in his stirrups, projecting his voice across the distance. "Caleb Hunter, John Cooper, William Cooper, by order of the Redstone Crossing Town Council and territorial law, you are under arrest. Come out peacefully and no one gets hurt." Caleb stood slowly, making sure Beck could see him clearly. "On what charges?" "Conspiracy to riot, unlawful assembly, incitement to violence. You have 5 minutes to surrender or we're coming in." "You're welcome to try," John Cooper's voice rang out from behind a wagon. "But understand something, Beck. We're armed, we're organized, and we're done being victims. You want to arrest us for defending our homes? You'll have to take us by force." The challenge hung in the air like gun smoke. Beck's posse shifted nervously, men exchanging glances. They'd expected scared farmers, easy targets. Instead, they faced a fortified position held by people who'd clearly decided that dying here was preferable to dying slowly under Kane's reign. "This is your last warning," Beck shouted. "Surrender now or face the consequences." "The consequences?" Caleb's voice went cold and hard. "You mean like Jacob Weiss faced? Like the families who watched their homes burn? We know what Kane's consequences look like, Beck. We're not afraid of them anymore." For a long moment, nobody moved. The two forces faced each other across 50 yards of empty prairie, both armed, both committed, neither willing to back down. The mathematics of violence hung between them. Who would shoot first? How many would die? Whether the survivors would call it justice or murder. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Everyone stand down, now!" U.S. Marshal James Garrett rode between the two groups, his horse moving at a controlled walk that suggested neither panic nor hesitation. He was flanked by two riders Caleb didn't recognize, both wearing federal badges, both carrying rifles across their saddles with the casual competence of men who knew how to use them. Beck wheeled his horse toward Garrett. "This doesn't concern you, Marshal. I'm enforcing local law. Local law is about to start a massacre that will have territorial consequences." Garrett's voice carried absolute authority. "I'm invoking federal jurisdiction. Everyone lowers their weapons, and we discuss this like civilized people, or I start arresting folks on both sides for disturbing the peace." "You don't have authority over—" "I have a telegram from the territorial governor giving me exactly that authority." Garrett pulled a paper from his jacket and waved it. "Arrived this morning. Seems someone sent detailed reports about the situation here, reports that made it all the way to Washington. People in fancy offices are suddenly very interested in what's happening in Redstone Crossing." He turned his horse to address both groups. "Here's what's going to happen. Everyone is going to put their weapons down. Not away, just down, and step back 10 paces. Then representatives from both sides are going to meet with me in the middle, and we're going to sort this out with words instead of bullets. Anyone who fires a shot before that happens will answer to federal charges. That clear? Silence. Then slowly, Caleb lowered his rifle and stepped back. Around the camp, settlers followed his lead. Across the divide, Beck's posse did the same with varying degrees of reluctance. Good, Garrett said. Now, Caleb Hunter, Russell Beck, Victor Kane, and representatives of the settler community. Come forward. Everyone else stays where they are. Caleb walked toward the neutral ground between the camps, feeling exposed with every step. John Cooper joined him, as did Hans Schmidt. From the other side came Beck, a nervous-looking town councilman, and Victor Kane himself, moving with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled even this negotiation. They met in a rough circle, Garrett at the center. The federal marshal looked at each face in turn before speaking. Gentlemen, you're about to destroy each other over land that doesn't belong to any of you. The territory owns it. The federal government owns it. What you have are claims, pieces of paper saying you get to use it under certain conditions. But none of you own it absolutely. You understand that? We have legal homestead rights, John Cooper said. And we have legal right to move cattle through open range, Kane countered. Both true, Garrett agreed. Which is why this situation requires compromise, not combat. He pulled out a map and spread it on the ground. This is the current cattle trail. It runs directly through land that's been granted to homesteaders. That's the problem. So here's the solution. You move the trail. Kane's face went dark. That trail has been there for 20 years. And it can move 5 miles west. There's open land there, unclaimed, that will serve just as well. Takes you 2 extra days to reach Redstone Crossing, but it avoids settler property entirely. 2 extra days is thousands of dollars in lost time. Increased risk of stampedes, weather damage. Is cheaper than a range war, Garrett interrupted. I've done the mathematics, Mr. Kane. The territorial government is prepared to compensate you for the inconvenience. Not full value, but enough to make the adjustment bearable. This is extortion. This is compromise. Something you should have tried before people started dying. Kane's jaw clenched. For the first time since Caleb had met him, the rancher looked genuinely cornered. Not defeated, but forced to acknowledge reality beyond his control. And what about them? Kane gestured toward the settlers. They stay? Build their farms right where my trail used to run. They stay. They build. They become permanent residents who pay taxes and support the territorial economy in ways that don't depend on seasonal cattle drives. Garrett's voice hardened. And most importantly, they stop being victims of violence that's been ignored for too long. I had nothing to do with SOAS. Save it, Garrett cut him off. I've read the reports. Witness statements from dozens of people describing attacks by riders traced directly to your ranch. Men arrested while still wearing your brand on their gear. You've been careful. I'll give you that. Never quite enough evidence for criminal charges. But there's more than enough for the territorial government to declare you a public nuisance and revoke your grazing rights entirely. The threat landed like a physical blow. Kane went pale, his carefully maintained composure cracking to reveal the raw calculation underneath. Lose the trail entirely, or accept the compromise. Those were his only options, and everyone present knew it. I'll need to consult with my lawyers, Kane said finally. You have until noon. After that, I implement federal oversight and you get nothing. Garrett rolled up his map. And Kane, if one more settler home burns, if one more suspicious accident happens, I will personally ride to the territorial capital and make sure every political favor you've ever called in gets burned to ash. Are we clear? Kane's smile was gone entirely now, replaced by naked hatred barely contained. Crystal. Excellent. Now as for you, Garrett turned to Caleb. The warrants Beck issued are federal nonsense with no legal standing. You're not under arrest. None of the settlers are. But I want your word that there will be no retaliation against Kane's men, no vigilante justice, no taking the law into your own hands. If they attack us, if they attack you, send word to me immediately, and I will deal with it through proper channels. Can you accept that? Caleb looked at the settlers, at Hans Schmidt's hopeful face, at John Cooper's cautious optimism, at the families watching from behind wagons with expressions that said they'd almost forgotten what safety felt like. We can accept that, he said. Good. Then as of now, this situation is under federal oversight. I'll be stationing 2 deputies here to monitor compliance. Any violations from either side get reported directly to the territorial governor. Garrett's gaze swept across everyone present. This territory is changing, gentlemen. The days of cattle barons running things by force are ending. The days of settlers being driven out by violence are over. What's coming is law, real law, backed by authority that actually means something. You can adapt to that reality or get buried by it. Your choice. The meeting broke up with all the warmth of a funeral. Kane rode back toward town without speaking, his men following like a defeated army. Beck looked lost, realizing that his carefully cultivated relationship with power had just been rendered irrelevant by forces beyond local politics. The settlers, though, they looked like people who'd been holding their breath for months and finally dared to exhale. Hans Schmidt gripped Caleb's hand with both of his own. Is over? Really over? The fighting part, maybe. You still have to survive the winter, grow crops, build a community. That's going to be its own kind of war. But a war we can fight. A war where hard work matters more than who has the most guns. Schmidt's eyes were wet. Thank you, Marshal, for not giving up on us. I'm not a marshal anymore. You are to us. Always will be. The days that followed felt like watching a storm dissipate. Kane's men stopped their raids, though whether from fear of federal oversight or simple calculation that the cost now outweighed the benefit, Caleb couldn't say. The cattle trail began its slow migration westward, rerouted around settler land by surveyors who worked under federal protection. And Redstone Crossing itself started the painful process of deciding what kind of town it wanted to be. The town council called another meeting, this time requesting rather than demanding Caleb's presence. Samuel Briggs looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week, his previous bluster replaced by exhausted pragmatism. Marshal Hunter, he began, then caught himself. Mr. Hunter, the council has been reconsidering recent decisions. Have you? Russell Beck has resigned his position. We find ourselves in need of proper law enforcement. Given recent events and federal oversight requirements, we wonder if you might consider returning to your previous role. Caleb studied the 5 faces before him. Webb looked relieved. Porter looked resentful. The others just looked tired. These weren't evil men, he reminded himself, just frightened ones who'd made bad choices and were now trying to find their way back to something resembling decency. No, he said simply. Briggs blinked. I'm sorry. I said no, I won't be your marshal again. But the town needs a lot of things. It needs to decide whether it wants to be a place where people can live or just a place where money changes hands. It needs to choose between being a community or being a convenience for whoever has the most power. It needs leadership that won't fold the moment things get difficult. Caleb leaned forward. I don't trust you to provide that. So no, I won't carry a badge for you again. Webb cleared his throat nervously. If it's a matter of salary, we're prepared to offer. It's not about money. It's about principle. You fired me for doing the right thing. You hired a thug to replace me because he'd do the wrong thing quietly. And now that federal marshals are watching, you want me back because it's convenient. That's not how trust works. Then what would you suggest? Briggs's voice had gone quiet, almost pleading. We genuinely need someone. The territory requires law enforcement. Hire Thomas Reed. He's young, but he's got integrity. More importantly, he's got sense enough to know when rules serve justice and when they just serve power. Reed refused the position. That was when you wanted him to enforce Kane's will, offer him the job with actual authority and federal backing. He'll take it. The council exchanged glances. Finally, Briggs nodded slowly. We'll extend the offer. And you, Mr. Hunter, what will you do? Caleb stood, preparing to leave. I'm going to help the settlers build. Teach them what I know about surviving out here. Make sure that when winter comes, they're ready for it. He paused at the door. And if Kane or anyone else decides to test whether federal oversight is real or just paper, I'll be there to remind them that some fights are worth finishing. He walked out into afternoon sunlight, feeling lighter than he had in months. The badge was gone, the official authority stripped away. But the purpose remained, clearer now, unburdened by institutional politics and compromises that had always tasted like betrayal. Thomas Reed found him an hour later sitting outside what remained of the church, sketching plans for a new building. They offered me the position, Reed said. You taking it? On conditions. Full authority to enforce the law as written. No interference from the council. And Garrett's promised that if Kane causes trouble, federal marshals back me up. Smart conditions. Reed sat down beside him, looking at the sketches. What's this? New church? Bigger, stronger, built by settlers and townspeople together. Thought it might be a good symbol, something that shows this place can be more than what it was. You really think that's possible? After everything that's happened? Caleb looked across the town toward the eastern prairie where settler wagons were beginning to transform into permanent structures. Crude cabins rising from grass, fields being plowed, fences going up to mark property lines that were now protected by more than just paper. I think people are capable of surprising themselves, he said. Capable of being better than they thought they could be if given the chance and the right push. And you're going to give them that push? Someone has to. The work began the next day. Caleb helped organize construction crews, mixing settlers who knew farming with townspeople who knew building. The cooperation was awkward at first, old resentments dying hard. But lumber doesn't care about politics, and nails don't ask questions about whose side you were on. Slowly, the church began to rise from its ashes. Other projects followed. A school for settler children, built with donated materials from merchants who decided that permanent residents meant permanent customers. A community well, dug by ranchers and farmers working side by side. Small things. But small things accumulated into something larger, a sense that maybe, possibly, they could all share this land without destroying each other. Victor Kane didn't disappear. He was too wealthy, too established for that. But he adapted, like successful predators always do. The relocated cattle trail worked well enough. His herd still reached market. Profits decreased slightly but remained substantial. And slowly, grudgingly, he began to realize that a territory of settled farmers created its own opportunities. Markets for his beef, stable workers for seasonal help, economic diversity that made the region less vulnerable to the boom and bust cycles of the cattle trade. He never apologized, never acknowledged wrongdoing, but he stopped fighting, which in its own way was a kind of surrender. 3 months after the standoff, Caleb stood at the eastern edge of what the settlers were calling New Hope, a cluster of farms spreading across land that had once been just empty prairie. Smoke rose from cabin chimneys. Children played in yards. Livestock grazed behind fences that marked boundaries everyone now respected. Hans Schmidt approached, his daughter running ahead to tackle Caleb's legs in an enthusiastic hug. "Uncle Caleb!" the girl shouted, a title she'd assigned him without asking permission. "Hey, little one!" Caleb picked her up, earning a delighted squeal. To Schmidt, "How's the planting going?" "Good, very good. The soil, she is rich. Eric Johansson says his wheat is already showing." Schmidt's English had improved significantly, though his accent remained thick. "We will have harvest by fall, real harvest. And the well project? Almost finished. The Cooper brothers, they know engineering. Who knew?" Schmidt smiled, then grew serious. "There is meeting tonight, all the settlers. We want to discuss formation of official township. Elect mayor, establish council. Become real community, not just camps." "That's good. You'll need structure." "We want you to be mayor." Caleb nearly dropped the child. "What? No, absolutely not." "Why not? You led us here, fought for us, taught us how to survive." "I'm not a politician, not a leader. You are both whether you admit or not." Schmidt took his daughter back, setting her down to run after a chicken. "But if you won't be mayor, at least come to meeting. Help us think through how to do this right." Caleb agreed, though reluctantly. That evening, he sat in the largest cabin, John Cooper's place, surrounded by 40 settlers who'd transformed from frightened refugees into determined pioneers. They argued about everything with the passionate intensity of people who finally had the freedom to shape their own destiny. Town boundaries, voting rights, how to handle disputes, where to build the school. Democracy in its rawest form, messy and loud and somehow beautiful. They elected John Cooper as mayor, which made sense. He had leadership experience and people's respect. Maria Schmidt became treasurer, her meticulous nature perfect for tracking communal resources. Eric Johansson took responsibility for organizing seasonal labor. Each person found a role, a purpose, a way to contribute to something larger than individual survival. Caleb watched it all with the satisfaction of a builder seeing foundations properly laid. This would work. Not perfectly, not without struggles. But it would work because these people had learned the most important lesson the frontier could teach, that survival required more than individual strength. It required community, compromise, and the willingness to forgive past wrongs in service of future possibilities. As the meeting broke up, Thomas Reed arrived on horseback, his marshal's badge catching lamplight. He looked exhausted, but satisfied. "Thought I'd find you here," Reed said, dismounting. "Got news from the territorial capital. Garrett's been promoted. He's now chief federal marshal for the entire territory. Good for him. He earned it. He also sent word about Kane. Seems the cattle baron's been making noises about running for territorial legislature. Wants to help shape policy for the region's future." Caleb laughed. "Of course he does. Can't beat them in the field, so he'll try politics instead." "You worried? About Kane in politics? He'll be one voice among many, constrained by rules he can't ignore without losing everything. He's neutered, even if he doesn't fully realize it yet." Caleb shook his head. "No, I'm not worried. The territory's changing too fast for one man to control anymore. That's the whole point." They rode back to Redstone Crossing together, the town's lights warm against the darkness. The place looked different now, less wild, more settled. The saloons were still there, still loud with cowboys and commerce. But so were family businesses, a proper schoolhouse under construction, and residents who thought in terms of years instead of seasons. The change wasn't complete, probably never would be. But it was real, and it was permanent, and that mattered more than perfection. Catherine Mills was waiting outside the boarding house when they arrived, a letter in her hand. "This came for you," she said to Caleb. "From back east. Looks official." Caleb opened it, scanning the contents with growing disbelief. It was from a judge in Kansas City, a man Caleb had worked with during the war, back when they'd both been idealistic enough to believe in systems and structures. The letter was an offer. Chief of police for a growing city, good salary, pension, respectability. Everything he'd thought he wanted before he came west. "What is it?" Reed asked. "Job offer, big city law enforcement, stable, safe." "You gonna take it?" Caleb looked at the letter, then at Redstone Crossing, then east toward New Hope, where settlers were building futures from nothing but determination and dirt. He thought about Jacob Weiss's grave, about Maria Schmidt's tears, about 40 families who'd learned that justice sometimes required ordinary people to become extraordinary. He tore the letter in half. "No," he said simply. "My work's here." Catherine Mills smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been meaning to ask. The church reconstruction committee wants your input on the design, and the school board needs someone to teach basic law and civics, and—" "I get it," Caleb laughed. "I'm staying. You can stop selling." But she was right. There was work to do. So much work. Teaching settlers about water rights and property law, helping the town council navigate federal requirements, mediating disputes between ranchers and farmers who were learning to share space, building institutions that would outlast any individual's presence. Not marshals' work, not gunfighters' work, just the slow, patient labor of turning a frontier town into a real community. Winter came hard that year, as winters on the plains always did. But New Hope survived, its cabins weather-tight, its residents prepared. 3 families gave up and left, unable to handle the isolation and hardship. The rest stayed, grew stronger, learned the lessons that only brutal weather could teach. Spring brought new settlers, families who'd heard about the place where farmers and cattlemen had found a way to coexist, where federal law actually meant something, where a man could build without looking over his shoulder for violence disguised as business interests. By summer, New Hope had doubled in size. Redstone Crossing was thriving, its economy no longer dependent solely on cattle season. The church was rebuilt, larger and grander than before. And the territory itself was changing, each small victory over violence and greed accumulating into something that looked almost like civilization. Victor Kane attended the church's dedication ceremony, standing in the back with his hat in his hands. He didn't speak, didn't apologize. But his presence was acknowledgement enough, that the world had changed, that his power had limits, that the future belonged to people who built instead of taking. Caleb watched him from across the congregation and felt no triumph, no satisfaction from the rancher's implicit surrender. Just quiet relief that the violence had ended, that people could live without constant fear. After the ceremony, as townspeople and settlers mingled with the awkward warmth of former enemies learning to be neighbors, Hans Schmidt found Caleb near the new church steps. "You did this," Schmidt said simply. "You made this possible." "I just held the line long enough for others to find their courage." "That is what leaders do." Schmidt extended his hand. "Thank you, my friend, for not giving up, for showing us that fighting for what's right matters, even when it seems impossible." Caleb shook his hand, feeling the weight of everything that simple gesture represented. Not just gratitude, but hope. Not just survival, but the possibility of something better. As the sun set over Redstone Crossing, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Caleb walked to the edge of town and looked back at everything they'd built. The church spire reaching skyward, the school with children's laughter spilling from open windows, the farms spreading east like promises written in wheat and corn, the town itself, no longer just a cattle stop, but a place where people chose to stay, to invest, to believe in futures that extended beyond the next season. It wasn't perfect. Violence still lurked at the edges. The frontier didn't surrender its brutality easily. Politics still corrupted. Greed still tempted. Human nature hadn't transformed overnight. But something fundamental had shifted. The idea that power alone determined right had been challenged and found wanting. The notion that settlers were disposable, that law was negotiable, that justice belonged only to those who could afford it, all of it had been tested in fire and proven false. Not everywhere, not completely. But here, in this one dusty town at the end of a 1,000-mile trail, people had chosen a different path. They'd decided that civilization meant more than commerce, that law protected everyone or it protected no one, that the frontier could be tamed without becoming cruel. Thomas Reed joined him on the rise, his marshal's badge worn but polished. "Heard you turned down another job offer," Reed said. "Sheriff position in Colorado. Better pay, easier work." "Not interested." "You planning to stay here forever?" Caleb considered the question, watching the wind move through the grass like waves on an ocean. "Forever's a long time, but for now? Yes. This place still needs work, still has people worth protecting, still matters. And when it doesn't need you anymore? Then I'll find somewhere else that does." Caleb smiled. "That's the thing about the frontier, Thomas. There's always another town, another fight, another group of people who need someone willing to stand between them and forces that want to destroy them. The work never ends. You just choose where to make your stand." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights begin to glow in windows across Redstone Crossing. A town settling into evening routine, families gathering for supper, children being called home, cowboys drinking in saloons but keeping it peaceful because Marshal Reed had made it clear that peace was no longer optional. Normal things, beautiful things, the kind of life that seemed impossible just months ago. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd walked away?" Reed asked. "That first night, when the Schmidt's wagon burned. If you just ignored it, kept the peace the way the council wanted?" Caleb thought about it honestly. The settlers would have been driven out or killed. Kane would have tightened his control. The town would have survived, maybe even prospered in its way. And I would have become the kind of man I've spent my whole life trying not to be. Was it worth it? All the fighting, the danger, nearly dying? Every single moment. Caleb turned to face his friend. Because we proved something important. We proved that ordinary people, when they decide they've had enough, can change things, can stand up to power and win. Not through violence, but through simple refusal to accept that might makes right. That's worth any price. Reed nodded slowly. "I'm glad you stayed. Glad you fought, even when it seemed hopeless." "It's never hopeless," Caleb said quietly. "Not as long as one person's willing to do the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's what separates civilization from chaos, the willingness to stand for principle when it costs you something." As darkness settled fully over the prairie, they walked back to town together. Behind them, the frontier stretched endlessly, wild and beautiful and full of possibilities. Ahead lay Redstone Crossing, no longer just surviving but beginning to thrive, transformed from a temporary cattle stop into a permanent home. The journey wasn't finished. It would never be finished, really. Building something worth having required constant work, eternal vigilance, the daily choice to be better than easier alternatives. But that work had purpose now. Direction. Hope. Caleb Hunter had come to Redstone Crossing expecting another temporary badge, another nameless town, another few months before moving on to escape ghosts that followed too close. Instead, he'd found a reason to stay. People worth fighting for. A future worth building. And though he'd never wear the Marshal's badge again, though his name would never appear in official histories or territorial records, the church that rose from ashes bore silent witness to what one stubborn man and a community of determined people could accomplish when they refused to accept that power was the only law that mattered. The frontier was changing, not everywhere, not fast. But here, in this one dusty town beneath endless stars, civilization had put down roots that would grow into something lasting, something good. And that, Caleb thought as he walked the quiet streets of Redstone Crossing one more time, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.